Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. Oh boy, I'm excited to talk about what we're talking about tonight. But first, it's time to introduce you to my always outrageous host companion, the second host. We share top billing, a la Cheers. One name in the top right, one in the bottom left. It's Siegen Sarowick. Big round of applause for him, everybody.
Hey, everybody. I was not prepared for such an honorable introduction.
Oh man, this whole episode is going to be done with honor, Siegen. And we're going to start from a place where I love it. I absolutely love it. It's Brendan Fraser History Month. And last week I talked about how, we got Mountain Dew Pitch Black is out there, and Hard Mountain Dew finally made its way to an East Coast state. Well, one of our listeners in Connecticut, I don't want to call him out, but he let me know that it was officially available and a website to check Connecticut liquor stores. So I just opened up a can of Hard Mountain Dew. And that's going to be fueling me through this episode because I love first of all, I guess the first thing before we go any further, we are recording this one early. Siegen mentioned that he was going to be sick this weekend, and as much as I love the banked episode that we have recorded, it is very much anti-Brendan Fraser History Month. Would you say that's fair to say, Siegen?
Yeah, I suppose. I don't appreciate the call out. As you know, I would never skip this in this particular month. I would never skip an episode. Now, that is to say, there is a lot of shit going on this month that we will be talking about after this month. But I wouldn't have left you hanging.
Oh yeah, but it's also Mother's Day, so rather than spending 2 hours recording with you, even for the always noble reason of celebrating Brendan Fraser in May, like now I get to spend time with Mom and make sure that she gets to feel good before she goes away. They're going on a trip to celebrate. The state of emergency has been lifted as of the time we're recording this, because the other crazy thing about a fan getting in touch with me from Connecticut and being like, it's available, here's where you can find it, here's where I found it, is the fact that this released on Monday and we're recording on Thursday. We are recording early. And the only reason I want to say that is if by some hope of hopes there is a resolution to the writer's strike this weekend while everybody's playing Tears of the Kingdom, it's Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is the reason that we're really not recording. Let's just be honest about it. That's why we're not going to talk about it in this episode, where we are going to present ourselves with honors. I'll remember to present myself with honors, Siegen.
Man.
But yeah, that's it. And the reason, Siegen, why don't you tell the people the reason why we're going to be presenting ourselves with honors this week as I take the first sip of this alcoholic malt Mountain Dew inspired beverage.
I'm really hoping this doesn't unleash the monster in you later. You're going to be so full of caffeine and malt beverage.
I mean, there's no caffeine in it. Holy shit, that is delicious.
How is there no caffeine in it? It's Mountain Dew.
I know it's Mountain Dew, but the whole thing is that it says on the can contains no Mountain Dew. It also says in pretty big, fuck you letters, 21 plus on the can.
Nice. Yeah, well, again, we've talked about the Mountain Dew spiked situation. But I'm glad that you were able to get a hold of it. The soda pop continuum continues. Well,
I mean, I guess not to keep this part going, and we'll get to it. I don't want to cut you off, but you had said you could call these places, right? And I called the closest liquor store to Rhode Island going into Connecticut, and the person that I spoke with was very much, we will not be carrying that in this store. And it's like, oh, is it just, and they're like, no, we have decided against it. It is up to us. It is our discretion. And we have decided to not be carrying that, which really lent a lot of credence to your argument last week that, Mountain Dew is sort of geared to children in a terrible way because it is full of caffeine and sugar and everything else.
Yeah.
But I actually got to, I didn't get to see it, I was on the phone, but I could hear the disdain in that woman's voice as I asked her, "Are you carrying the hard Mountain Dew?" And she's just like, "No, and we will not be doing that." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool, thanks. I'm not the platform for this."
I'm an adult male that wants to do shitty things to my body. I'm allowed to do that in this country. Bye. Click. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well.
So yeah. So that's it. It's really, really good. And I imagine as I'm making the Kingdom Cry this weekend, this is going to be the beverage of choice. There's only 100 calories for this 12-ounce can. This feels like someone made a deal with the devil to get this made, is what I have to say. I don't know how to feel about this.
No. Shaun White. Sean
oh, the tomato?
Yeah.
This is not honorable. What we're doing is not honorable. Sejan, let's do something with honors.
Yeah. So this week we are watching the Brendan Fraser 1994 classic. Yeah, 1994 classic with honors. I say classic. Do you know anybody in the world that's seen this movie besides the two of us?
Funny you should ask, Sejan. I asked my mother if she remembered seeing with honors, and she's like, "I don't know. If I did, it would have been a long time ago." And I'm like, "Yeah, about 29 years ago." And she's like, "Yeah, I don't know if I would have done it though, because this." And I'm like, she's like, "Who's in it?" And I'm like, "Well, it's Joe Pesci and Brendan Fraser." And she's like, "Hey, you know, it rings a bell, but I don't think I did." And then I'm like, "Oh, Moira Kelly's there?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, he steals his thesis. And then for everything he does, he'll give him back a page of the thesis." And like,
right.
Moira Kelly was the key to unlocking my mother's memory of this film. Yeah, and it checks out, right? Because it came out in April of 1994. And so while she was pregnant with Dale, there were still plenty of times for them to go to the movies. Like, I remember the time that I think I was staying over at a friend's house, or maybe it was like a weekend birthday party, that they went to go see Pulp Fiction. And I was like, so bummed. I wanted to see that movie. They're like, "Yeah, we saw it. You're not going to see that one until you're older."
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, so this is an oft-forgotten film, I feel like, and I will have to say, probably pretty rightly so. I enjoy this movie, right? Like, if we're like, let's just get this out of the way now. Like, I am very much a fan of this movie, and honestly, I was the one that was championing doing this movie, like, for Brendan Fraser History Month, because I had fond like memories of this being one of those ones that my parents rented. And they let me watch with them after they had seen it once or twice. They were like, "Yeah, you can watch this one with us." And it felt not like I mean, I guess it felt like I was getting away with something, getting to watch an older person's movie, right? And there's like a whole slew of movies in that vein, right?
Especially from Brendan Fraser in the 90s.
And so this is one of the ones that I remember getting away with watching, quote unquote. But upon rewatching, I really wasn't getting away with much. It's a pretty soft film in a lot of ways, up to and including like the saccharine like after school special soundtrack that goes along. Honestly, I think it's the most detrimental part of this film. The thing that really brings it down is that the soundtrack sounds like somebody from like Cinemax at 3 o'clock in the morning like wrote it, right?
Yeah, and the weirdest part of the whole thing is I'll remember open parentheses from the motion picture with honor, close parentheses, by Madonna. Like, it's insane to me that this is a film that, like, nobody remembers, and the whole musical message behind it, the only thing that got any sort of award traction is a song about remembering things.
Yeah. Which is, I guess, kind of the point, because he does remember his whole thesis after it gets, like, stolen from him.
Yeah, well, and then I don't even know. Like, this is a very strange movie, especially in terms of, this is the type of movie that I absolutely love. Josh Hamilton is in this film, and, I mean, we're going to watch Glory Days, which is in the same vein as the type of movie I'm about to explore and talk about. But I mean, like, for me, Josh Hamilton is kicking and screaming. The Noah Baumbach film from, I believe, 1996. It's got Eric Stoltz in it. Parker Posey's there. It's got all these other, like, guys who would go on to be, you know, like, sort of the gentlemen of Hollywood. In, like, kind of gross terms, right? I don't know. Are you familiar with Kicking and Screaming? It's not the soccer one. That is what
Yeah,
I always find
no,
myself.
I only am aware of it in the regard of every time you mention it, I think of the Will Ferrell one, and you go, not the Will Ferrell one, and I'm like, oh, okay, then no, I don't know what movie you're talking about.
So seeing Josh Hamilton's name, I immediately lit up because, you know, he is the main guy in Kicking and Screaming. So it's getting to see him 2 years before that. And that movie, Kicking and Screaming, is about these four guys who have just graduated from college and what comes next. Sort of in that weird gap between, like, we still have the house paid for the next couple of weeks. And them dealing with it like, we're not college students, but we're graduates, but it doesn't really feel like it because we haven't really gone out into the real world. And then there's some other Arrested Development stuff that happens there. So then seeing him, I'm immediately connected to it. And then I realize there are not a lot of movies in the vein of With Honors, where it is like the final year of college, and so much of that is focused on the actual academics of it. Right?
Sure. Yeah, I guess. The big thing for me is that this is not a college movie to me. This is the homeless man drama. Like this is like, so a couple of years before this is Terry Gilliam's The Fisher King, and being a Terry Gilliam piece, the story is fucking nuts and the visuals are crazy. So it's not nearly as complex as that movie, but it is trading on a lot of the same tropes in terms of the relationship between him and Joe Pesci, are the same things that you see a lot of between Jeff Bridges and Robin Williams in that one, right? And then like there's that kind of trope, that kind of storyline, that kind of like, I'm gonna show somebody in a lower class, doesn't necessarily have to be homeless, but it's easiestly exemplified in this situation, right? Like, and again, I think that's what With Honor is really kind of, I think that's where it stubs its toe, is that it is so surface level in all of the like art, like metaphors that it's trying to use. Like there's not much of a metaphor going on, but this idea that he's helping somebody out that he considers to be lower than him, and then of course he learns from this person that maybe he knows more than I realize, right? Like I misunderestimated him because of his station in life. Like that is this movie to a T, and like that is so many Oscar bait 90s movies. So like, yeah, I'll give you the like setting is rather unique, but not really, because as you pointed out, like I think of, you want to talk about last days of college and everybody growing up, like I immediately think of something like PCU. Like that's where, you know, like or
which is weird because that's like the first weeks. Well, I guess it is the end of college. That's why the pre-frosh is visiting, is because he's wondering if he'll go there next. And yeah, PCU is definitely one of those ones that entered into my head today.
Right, or yeah. You know, I mean, you also like not the entire movie, but like the last act of Revenge of the Nerds. It's not the end of college. Like that kind of senior-itis is often more reserved for high school stories, but that's also not really what they're playing on. Like as much as all of them are kind of experiencing this moment of wanting to like grow up and blah blah blah, like none of them are misbehaving in a way that is like offensive to me. Right?
Yeah.
Like, more to the point, Monty, our main character played by Brendan Fraser, is like so focused on the academics. So I guess in that regard, it's unique, but that also makes it kind of boring. Like, again, from a place of love, but like, not a lot of shit really, nothing gets spicy in this movie. This movie never gets spicy.
Yeah, the stakes of the film feel hyper low.
I will take that back. Joe Pesci, when he gets going, gets spicy, but then they never let him go long enough. I will at least say that.
Well, I mean, even like, all right, so spoilers for With Honors. If you haven't seen the movie, I would definitely say it's worth a watch. I don't want to speak for Siege in there.
It's an easy watch.
Yeah,
it's an easy watch.
Yeah.
Just don't go into it thinking, oh yes, this, he should have won for this. Why did it take so long for the whale to come out? Like, no, that's not going to be what you're going to walk away from. No. You're going to see him put in some fucking work. And like the movie is saved by the acting of everybody in this movie. The ensemble in this movie is phenomenal, but like the story is not really that, again, doesn't really get like too crazy. And like the soundtrack, like I said, is almost straight up offensive in some moments. Like it ruins really dramatic moments with some of its really shitty piano. Well, not even like faux piano through a synth wave, like bullshit. Like it's just there's a lot of things about this movie that really do what's happening on screen in front of your eyeballs really don't do it justice, and it's just not fair to the rest of the film.
just because you brought it up and now it's all I can think about, the first time that Brendan Fraser's Monty brings Simon, Joe Pesci, into the Widener Stacks as his guest, the music that's playing, I thought an alarm was going off. There's like a beep beep in that score track, and I'm just like, oh my god, is there a fire going on somewhere? Like, Jesus. It not only did it take me out of the movie, it also brought me to a heightened sense of like alertness that like, is something happening right now?
There's a specific moment for me, which is when Brendan Fraser's on the phone with his mom, and you can tell that she's trying to figure out if he needs money. But I mean, you know, as is always the case in these kinds of movies, including other Brendan Fraser college movies, the family is not well off, right? So he's trying to convince her that it's okay, that he'll figure it out, not to worry about the money. I think it's when he's trying to explain about his broken leg. I'm not quite sure.
It's Christmas. It's Christmas and why he can't come home.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
that's what it is. But then if all that's playing, the reason that I can't pinpoint exactly which moment it is because all I can think of is the soundtrack that is like straight up like the joke from Family Guy. It's basically just like la la la. Like, I was just like, this is upsetting. I'm not paying attention to anything happening in this moment because all I could do is think about this music being ridiculous.
All I could think about was all of the candles that he had lit.
Yeah.
I'm just like, there are too many candles lit in the house for you to be the only person in it, Brendan Fraser. Yeah, you're gonna burn your friend's house down.
Yeah. With Joe Pesci in the basement.
Oh no, Joe Pesci at that point has left him. Like, it is.
Yeah.
Like, that's like weirdly the break into 3 moment where the movie becomes what the movie should have been the whole time. And I feel like we're being kind of hypercritical about With Honors. And I will say, it's a movie that both of us enjoy, but here's a crazy thing. Here's the really insane thing. We are just coming off of literally 24 hours ago recording an episode for the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe looking at the movie Airheads, which also took place in 1994. It was released in 1994. Right. And in addition to With Honors and Airheads, The Scout, Brendan Fraser's turn acting against Albert Brooks in a sports comedy drama, is the 3rd movie. 1994 wasn't just Jim Carrey's year. Brendan Fraser also had 3 movies come out. The difference is that I don't think any of them really did anything to move the meter for him as a performer.
I will say that across the board, critically, he is pretty well supported. I won't say praised. Not everybody was in praise of Airheads, right? And I'm sure that there's definitely some people that were not in praise of With Honors. The Scout is generally well remembered because anything with Brooks in it is pretty well remembered. But he is often cited as being a shining like light in the muck that is the 1994 Brendan Fraser oeuvre.
Yeah, but the other thing,
but generally no. These 3 movies are not successful films by any measurable amount, right? Like, they're successful in our hearts, but that's about it, right? Yeah. Versus the Jim Carrey stuff, where we actually have talked about very much that those movies were critically panned as well, but the difference was that audiences fucking flocked to those.
But they made billions of dollars. No, not billions, right. Millions, because it was the 90s. They just made so much money on such small budgets. I mean, to the fact that like The Mask was supposed to come out before it was shot and ready to go before Ace Ventura, and then the power of Ace Ventura is what really like beelined it to the theaters.
Right.
And then, you know, the Farrellys come out with Dumb and Dumber, and it's just thing. But I didn't realize that Brendan Fraser had 3 movies where he is like essentially a lead player. The Scout may be more supporting because it's the Scout, the titular Scout is the lead, but
I mean, it's enough for him to be on all of the advertisement and cover of the box. Like, it's just him and Brooks on.
It's a two-hander, definitely a two-hander.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring that up, the real reason I bring it up is that of those 3 movies, I think With Honors is probably the weakest, and that is very sad to me, because as much as I'm here to celebrate Brendan Fraser, who I really just want to lavish praise upon this time is Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
What he is doing as Simon Wilder is insane. Especially when 2 years before he was My Cousin Vinny, right? Vinny LaGuardia Gambini. We've done his Christmas album, right? Just to tie it all together. And then like other than that, like Home Alone, right? Like those are the things that we're exposed to this character through. I mean, specifically you and me, right? People of our age group, millennials.
I at this point, sure. I mean, the thing is that I had pretty quickly seen like Goodfellas, right? Like that's also the other big thing to keep in mind here. Like that was a 1990 film. I probably didn't see it in 1990, but at some point in this time span, I did. You know, my family was huge on. We had all of the Godfather movies on the multiple VHS collections and stuff like that. So my family was very into that style of film. You know, my dad loves a good crime epic.
That is really sad for me that your brother, as of let's be honest, 5 years ago, had never seen The Godfather.
Well, you have to remember that he was the baby, and so he was very much protected from a lot of stuff that I wasn't. Yeah. Also, on top of that, like he just also was very much not interested in what I love him to death, and he's my brother, but he also like. He spent the majority of our time growing up doing everything he could to not be around my family.
Fair.
So there's also that aspect to it. Yeah.
All right. Well, then, sorry I threw a cup at your chest, Zach. Always, eternally sorry for that. It just surprised me because of all the other obscure 70s movies I have discussed with him. But back to this. Like, Joe Pesci is on fire in With Honors. The character that he is playing, the things that he does with so little, right? Like little ticks and it he's blown it out of the water. And then like it really is something to do with what Honest Trailers called, and I'm sure it was someone else before it, but I saw that this movie was mentioned in the Honest Trailers for Jumanji. And I'm like, well, I'm curious, right? You have to imagine that big bushy beard Robin Williams, maybe they call attention to the fact that, like, that's the character that Joe Pesci was playing. And it was so weirdly prominent in the 90s, right? Yeah. But at the end of it, they're like, whatever happened to those magical hobo movies? And they show The Fisher King, they show With Honors, and they show Moscow on the Hudson. And it's like, I mean, like, I don't know if I would call Simon Wilder a magical hobo.
And that's where the Terry Gilliam stuff of Fisher King really is like. There is some wild shit that happens in that movie that I'm sure then bleeds over to some of the stuff, because as I said, even I was like feeling that as I was watching this, I was like, this is very much like a really like toned down exploration of that same relationship of the Fisher King for sure. But yeah, I don't know if I would call him magical, but there is this element to him that he is wise, right?
Yes.
So it's the same kind of scale that you see with like the magical African American figure that you see in so many, like, I love the man, but Stephen King really likes to lean into that character a lot, right? But like, you know, like horror movies and mystical movies of Americana like really like to lean on that archetype. Like you could also look at like this. I mean, you said Home Alone. Both of the Home Alone movies very openly, the second one especially, feature that type of character archetype, right? Like there is something about that like commedia dell'arte figure, like, right, where it's the guy that appears to be down on his luck, but the more that you get to know him, the more you realize that he's got it more figured out than you do, right? And this is such a trope that pervades even to today. I mean, like, as somebody that has put 300 hours into this game, one of the most prominent figures and first characters that you get to know in the game of Stardew Valley is exactly this. It is this guy that has run off into the woods to make a life for himself, literally living in a tent. And like, you get the impression at first that he's not well off because you find him like going through garbage and stuff like that, and that's how you like first get to meet him. But then the more you talk to him, the more you learn that he used to be this professor that traveled the world. He was very rich at some point. He owned a lot of the town and he gave it all up because he wanted a simpler life. Like this exact trope at play in a game that came out not 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even like Golf Story, the like washed up pro who no one gives any time to is the person that is going to lead you to greatness in it.
Yeah. Right. And so you build on that first, like you build on that small idea first, is the one that looks like he's fallen is actually the wisest of us all. And then it just kind of it blows up from there, and you get to a point where it is applied to this idea of homelessness. And it is such a fascinating way that people chose to look at, and still to this day, as I said, choose to look at this idea of the houseless, right? Like this idea of these people that, like were called vagrants, were called, like they have been mistreated by society for so long. And this idea that somebody looks at this and goes, surely this must be the life they have chosen because they know more than the rest of us. And it's like, no, man, like there's a lot of shit that has caused this. This is one of the few movies with honors, just to get back to the subject at hand, that almost kind of gets to that, but then it never really lands because, again, it's a soft movie. It doesn't ever want to make that hard kind of reality break, like hey, this is a real thing that happens to people. They die on the streets, and it's just like, we got more from Groundhog Day than we do from With Honors in that regard.
Yeah, but it was 1993. It was a different time, Sejid. It was the 80s, by your own admission of how films work. But you're not wrong in that. It is the way that it's strange. It is very strange. But I guess the other reason why I bring it up is I mentioned it during one of the quizzes that people didn't know a Robin Williams answer on Jeopardy. And it was because this actor performed in Moscow on the Hudson. That's not exactly what it was, but it was a Moscow on the Hudson question, and nobody answered Robin Williams. So then you talk about how this is almost like a forgettable thing. It became such a part of the tapestry of 90s cinematic tropes that it all just fades into the background. And these movies blend together and don't stand out, which is sort of unfortunate because it's a big moment for Hollywood in how they're trying to portray things. Now, you're not wrong. They are like, we can win an award by saying, look at us shine this spotlight on the most underprivileged of us. But
you gotta instill some other hook. And what's the hook on this one? Oh, Harvard, like that's the hook of this movie, is that he is this homeless dude that happens to be smarter than the Harvard grad. Like that's the whole shtick, and that doesn't work. That's not enough for me, and I don't think enough for people at the time of this movie coming out.
I mean, so that all comes to a head in that set piece where, for some reason, he thinks that he's going to love it. Monty is convinced, like, oh, Simon, I have a surprise for you. And he takes him to the lecture of his thesis advisor, Dr. Kilcannon. No, Pitcannon, Dr. Pitcannon. And I'm like, first of all, this guy has done nothing but show disdain for, like, what Harvard represents. So I don't know why you think he's going to enjoy getting to sit in on this class with you. And then
he's making the mistake that he thinks he can quote unquote fix Simon. He thinks that if he can show him what this world is like, he's at this point realized how intelligent Simon really is, right? Like he keep talking about Robin Williams and bushy beards, and I also can't stop thinking about Good Will Hunting this whole time, but that doesn't come out for like 5 years after this or whatever. But
maybe 4, but yeah.
But there's this idea that he thinks then if he can bring Simon to a class to see what's going on, he thinks that's going to somehow light something in Simon and make him, in Monty's mind, straighten his life out, right? Like, and that's just not what happens. And we as the audience kind of know that's not what's going to happen because, again, we've seen a fucking movie in the 90s. We understand what's going on and what's about to happen. It's another kind of instance of this movie kind of wanting you to go along for the ride, but not earning that, not right. And so to your point, like you're sitting there wondering, like, why did you think this was going to work? Because the film dictates that he has to is the only reason.
Yeah, well, but then it goes on to the fact that he gets into that like verbal sparring match with the professor, and then as he leaves, right, and he makes some quality points there, though I have to say, now, and probably then too, if our president wanted to destroy the world with the nuclear arsenal at his command, he could probably do it. right? Like, that felt like such a strange question. I wasn't sure exactly the point that he was trying to make.
Because it's just it's a surface level lead in
Yeah.
just to talk about the checks and balances system built into the Constitution that is a glorious thing for this movie to hold up and for us to be watching at this very moment in history, because fuck me, it just made me realize that this has always been the goddamn problem. But I mean, to the point of how surface level this class is, what is and
it's
I know
a
you're gonna know
senior
the answer
seminar
to this
at
question, Devin,
Harvard,
that's why I'm
man.
asking it.
Sorry.
What is Monty's major?
He's a government major.
What the fuck does that
He
mean?
graduates with a degree in government. So I would guess political science.
Yes, why not at least that? Now, with a specialty in certain types of science, like constitutional law or something, like maybe. There's just the vagueness of he's getting a degree in government. He's at Harvard studying government. That sounds like something my mom would tell people when she didn't know what to tell them about what I was doing in theater. She was like, well, he's in school for theater. That's fine. That's great to say then. But when you're talking to the person that is in charge of your degree and that is what they're talking about, you getting your degree in, I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, it was strange because he's not in Harvard Medical. He's not in Harvard Law. Right? Very obviously, those are not the two things that he is pursuing. Because right. Jeff represents Harvard Medical. No one represents Harvard Law. I guess Boz was the representation of Harvard Law, but just by the nature of Boz is gone in this film. Yeah. Also, I mean, like, did you get a little shiver up your spine every time they said Boz, or was that just me?
I've already been living with the knowledge of this film long before I knew you fuckers, so I was like, it was the other way around.
It was the other way around for you. Fair. Yeah. That's completely fair. So I'm like, there's no representation of the most famous thing that Harvard is known for. Like, maybe he's in Harvard Law with a focus on government law, but then that's not what's said when he is awarded his degree at the end of the film. Yeah. Like, it is just Monty Kessler. Government, and I'm like, the fuck is that? What the fuck does that mean? And like, very obviously, Moira Kelly's Courtney is there for architecture because she's always like actually doing architecture, and I guess Patrick Dempsey's there for communication. I mean, does he even go to Harvard? Does he just work there? I don't necessarily understand Everett's character, other than the fact that it's more like, I want to work at a radio station again. Like, there's a weird theme that we stumbled upon in 1994 Brendan Fraser films. But yeah, like, so that whole sequence, and then, like, he gets the round of applause, and even though it doesn't teach it doesn't teach Simon the lesson Monty wanted him to learn, it becomes Simon's, like, crowning achievement. Yeah. And the movie is then ready to move into the fact that this man is going to die. And and the grossest thing about this character is going to die is the fact that there are no stakes behind it. It is just, this guy has asbestosis. He has a bunch of asbestos fibers in his lungs. He has an expiration date, and it's soon. So it's not even one of those things where, like, oh, maybe there's something they can do. Maybe they could live life to the fullest. It's just like, no, we're just telling you right now, get your affairs in order with this character, because he's going to pass away eventually.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all telegraphed. It's 100% telegraphed throughout this film. But I will, to kind of get back to the idea that we do find something that we both enjoy in this film, I think that is part of it for me, right? Like, not only am I seeing this at a point in my life where less complex films are probably more to my liking, right? When I'm like 7 or 8 years old when I see this movie, like, I don't need there to be elaborate life lessons. They could be pretty straightforward ones, because that's what I'm getting from all of my media. So, like, nostalgia definitely is playing a huge factor in that, and it softens the blow of how kind of surface level this whole movie really is. But also, like, I'm kind of coming back around to that in my later years. Like, we've had so much over the last 20 years, like, really try and dig into, like, deep, meaningful, complex storytelling and all of that. And I'm not saying I'm writing that stuff off completely. It's just that when everybody is going that deep, it suddenly is like it's like a treasure to find something that is easy to consume and still makes me feel good. You know, this movie panders. This movie panders to me, and I enjoy that. I'm sick of getting mad at a movie for pandering to me, which is a conversation we've had on this show many times.
Yeah, it is. This is something that connects with me. I mean, the whole broken leg part of this movie is kind of incredible. Like, to the point that
what is it doing in this movie though?
Like, I almost wonder if Brendan Fraser hurt himself for real during the making of this film. Yeah, so they had to write it in the movie. Like that independent film I worked on in 2007, where the lead actor broke his hand in the bar fight that got me the job. So then they just wrote it into the movie. And yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's the story.
I kept thinking of the fake TV show in Seinfeld, which would have been years after this. But the whole joke about how like he gets hurt by the guy, so the guy is like forced to be his butler. Like, in my brain, I think I had kind of melded that story into this movie and was waiting for the moment in this movie that because Brendan Fraser broke his leg and somehow Simon was involved, he was going to by law be forced to help Simon. But no, it's a deal just between the two of them to get Monty's thesis back. He's like, I will do favors for you, Simon, in order to get my thesis back from you. I thought their relationship was completely flipped in my brain, and I think it was entirely because of Seinfeld.
Well, because there's this weird moment where it feels as if Simon is sorry, I can't think of his freaking name. I've said it too many times. Monty's valet, where he's like, let me get your books for you. Let me do this. And it's just like, and then they're walking and he kind of feels like he's his manservant. And I'm like, this is weird. This is kind of weird. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if at Harvard in the 90s, there weren't students who were hiring local homeless to be their valets and butlers. Like, it was one of those things where I'm just like, there's a really wrong message to take away from what is going on right now. Because
the fact that he falls into this role of servitude to the Harvard boy is not a great look at all.
Yeah, and that is messy. That is a messy thing that happens because the way that it's written, the way that it's scripted is the fact that this kid is now sort of the servant to this person that is such a lower class than him, right? Like, that's what it looks like on paper. And honestly, when you consider his thesis and just how cynical he is about like people who are drains on the American economy, like, you think, oh, so now that it's been flipped and he's the person who is, you know, the persecuted lower class, he's going to learn that, like, that's a really shitty opinion that you have in the world. But like, that doesn't really ever happen.
Yeah, I don't know. This movie really, 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 really wants to make a statement. It just refuses to make a strong one at any point. I mean, up to and including, like, you know who plays his teacher in that classroom scene?
Gore Vidal.
What a wild fucking pull to bring in fucking Gore Vidal to then speak on, like, the authoritarian nature of our president. Just like a wild, yeah. So again, I'm not sure what message they're trying to send when they do something like that.
So I have a bit of a theory, and this totally comes from forensic screenplay reading and noticing those bits. I feel like this screenplay was initially written by, I don't have the person who wrote its name, and I feel bad about that, but there's a lot of moments in this movie. Like,
are you talking about the writer of the movie, or
the writer of the film? The writer of the film.
Oh, Simeon. I have it written here, and I cannot say it.
Is that right?
But William.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like there's a bunch
Billy Masterson. No, what? Sorry.
Mastro Giorgio.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Now you saying it doesn't, because I mean, like, craziest names in the writing and directing of this. I love it. Cassisian, like, great, as the director. But I feel like William Mastro Giorgio initially wrote this movie.
It's not that, by the way. I'm sorry if I misled you.
You did mislead me. You told me, yeah, you got it, Devin.
Yeah. No, it's Master Simone.
Master Simone. Okay.
think.
Well,
Yeah.
regardless, that it feels like, because Monty has the moment where he says, "I'm a 50-year-old." No, not Monty. Simon says, "I'm a 50-year-old man," and he refers to that. And then it is very prominent when he reads the first draft of his obituary that he was born in 1942. So then 50 years, that would be 1992. And it could just be one of those situations where, like, I'm 51, but I don't say it. But then, very specifically, they are the graduating class of 1994. And that hit me just, like, kind of off base. I'm like, oh, I really thought that this was going to be, like, it released in 94, but it takes place earlier than that. So I believe that this script was originally written as a person who had lived through 3 presidencies in a Republican nation, right? You have the two...
An ex-soldier. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so you have the 2 Reagans, you have George Herbert Walker Bush, and then suddenly in 1992, it's a Democrat who's in office with Bill Clinton. So I think he begins writing this as this fact that, like, he only ever knew the Republican way of leading this country. And then seeing how the Democrats do it, like, it really sort of changed his mind. And we were having a little bit of a conversation, a discussion, a debate pre-record as to who's the Republican in this movie. And your argument was Jeff, and I get that. Jeff is very much against all of the kindness that is being shown towards Simon Wilder in this movie. And so there's the representation. But from the beginning, when he recites the first paragraphs of his thesis to his thesis advisor, I'm like, oh, this is a character who's a Republican, which honestly, Harvard, early 90s, makes sense. It honestly makes sense. The professor is clearly a Republican with the ways that he, like, kind of throws in his jabs towards political correctness. Our founding persons, our founding parents, instead of founding fathers. Like, he says that with all of the disdain of, I'm just going to say it, like, Donald Trump, and the way that, like, he would mock things by using it. So, like, it all hit this thing. And then it's that realization for Monty that, like, he has been trying to live up to this guy's ideal and standard, and then realizing that, like, well, no, that kind of prioritizes the government and what the government is able to do. It doesn't really make the citizens people. And by getting to spend time with this human being who, like, is basically forgotten by the government, and, you know, talking about how just on the nose this film is, literally he is, like, cast aside by the government when the asbestos that they were forcing him to work with makes him no longer useful to them.
Yeah, but also very importantly, he still loves his country because he very much is a student of the Constitution and, like, government, like one of the first things, like, government to-dos, right? Because, like, one of the first things he does when he steals the newspaper is to sell. Did you hear the fucking weird ass line that he yells?
Yeah,
Clarence Thomas sent to, like, Clarence Thomas sent up the hill, moves on into the Supreme Court. It was like, oh shit.
Yeah, he is. That scene's fantastic. I love that whole moment where he's like, "Can I borrow a quarter?"
It shows, yeah, it shows that he's still kind of tuned into what's going on, like, weirdly in the moment and stuff like that. He does steal the paper and read it every day and all that. But we also see him give that whole speech in the classroom about how much he loves the Constitution because it is a living, breathing document that is meant to change. Like, and so as much as he is been completely cast aside by this government and completely finds himself at odds with it in his lifetime, he still believes in it. And that is such a, again, it's another very big tropey character, but also one we run into a lot in this world. So, like, it's hard to argue with that one.
Well, I mean, it's not that he doesn't, he loves the country, he kind of hates the government. Because there's that brilliant scene that had shades of Looney Tunes Back in Action immediately following it, where he's like, I went to the Social Security office, now it's time for us to go watch the Bugs Bunny movie. I loved it. At that freaking Lowe's theater that I've been to a bunch of freaking times, right?
Yeah,
it's where I saw King of Kong, of all movies, to, like, just be able to point at. Yeah, like I'm like, oh, I know that theater. But yeah, like so the Social Security office and the fact that like he doesn't want a handout from the government because he is upset with the government for how the government treated him. But he has such faith in America that eventually, because of the checks and balances that have been put into place by our founding parents, which he fantastic little moment there of like throwing it back in there. Like eventually the government can make good on that. And then after Monty finds him about to die on the street and actually takes him into the home and not just the camper van in the backyard, and he's like, I think it's time for me to make up with the government. Like, that's a
old
huge...
Uncle Sammy, as
yeah, old Uncle Sammy. Like, it is just... It's kind of beautiful. Like, the arc that he has... Because the argument, and that's the other argument too, and I understand where you come from the centralist perspective on Brendan Fraser's character, because the argument of it's your money, you paid into it, but that was also really something that was trumpeted by like Republicans, is the fact that like it's your money, you're paying into the Social Security, like, but let's also ignore the fact that we're going to kind of use it as an interest-free loan from you in order to fill up our coffers. Like, it's all propaganda at work. I don't know. I love this film because it, like, inspired me to think more and to, like, engage more. And also to, like, live more. Like, this was my Dead Poets Society. If that makes sense in any sort
that's
of
another
way.
That's another great one that's very much in this vein, and another Robin Williams one. Joe Pesci just chasing that Robin Williams heat, I guess, in this film.
I like when
man,
he played the genie. No, I'm kidding.
When he did those really weird impressions for about 10 minutes that nobody asked him to do, that was the weirdest part of this whole film.
And all the cocaine. Oh, sorry. I am moving on.
Man, I mean, like, I want to celebrate this movie as like a very memorable film for myself. I think where I'm getting caught up is talking about this movie as being anything worth like going back to as a film person, right? And I'm putting on my fucking like
No.
I'm getting up on my
Your
high horse as I
pantaloons.
say that word, right? Yeah. But like that idea that this movie didn't really contribute anything to me as an artist. Like, there isn't anything in this movie that I took forward looking for in other films. I didn't see this movie and think, man, now that I've seen With Honors do this, I need to see every film do this. That just didn't happen. And this is kind of that time in both my history as like an impressionable like 6 to 10 year old in this era of seeing all of the movies that we've talked about today, but also as we've talked about, where like the film in the 90s was just trying to figure itself out. And the important films from the 90s that we like to go back to and really dig into often are movies that brought something to the table. Whether or not it's something that stuck around, or whether or not it was something that explored something that we needed to at the time, but we've sworn off. I mean, like, you know, think about like our relationship with something like Clerks, where we've openly talked about how like what happens in that movie is not what should happen. Like the ways that like that characters are portrayed and dialogue comes across and all that is not necessarily what we want to see in all movies going forward. But we're really happy it happened that one time, right? I can't even say that about With Honors. There's not even something so controversial in With Honors that I'm like, man, it's great somebody put that on screen that one time, because we don't ever need it again now after this. There's not even that to say, right? Like, With Honors really doesn't move the dial in any meaningful way in any sense, not even as a Brendan Fraser movie, to really bring it down to the point, because as you pointed out, there's 2 other Brendan Fraser movies this year, and they're stronger films. We haven't even looked at one of them, and I will sit here and say that with all confidence that The Scout is definitely a much more important film in the terms of 90s cinema than With Honors ever is. Airheads, I think, is even above that, because Airheads is this delightful film in which we kind of realize like 90s comedy can be inconsequential, right?
Yeah, and that inconsequentialness of 90s comedy, I hear a lot of people who were not grown up on that, like people who were born later than us, like about 10 years younger than us, really have an issue with that because of what they grew up with in the 2000s.
Because everything had a point in the 2000s. Everything had an edge to it, was biting somebody's ankle. Every movie made in the 2000s was an angry fucking dog. And like some of those dogs were a little cuter than others, but every single one of those movies had teeth.
Yeah. And regarding The Scout, in terms of just how that affected people and touched people, the end of April, with a person who I did not mention to them that I was about to celebrate Brendan Fraser for the next 31 days of May. Like, we were just talking about sports movies. They brought up The Scout, and they had so much vitriol towards that movie and the world that it, like, portrays. Because of the fact that how many frickin' strikes Steve Nebraska throws in that game in the movie. And they're like, it's so unbelievable. And I'm just like, it's a movie, though. Like, it's a sports fantasy movie.
And it's supposed to be about him being really good.
He's supposed to be like an otherworldly baseball pitcher.
Exactly. That is so much the plot of that movie that, like, yes, you are correct.
Yeah, like, you noticed it, and they're like, but it bothers me. Like, it's not believable. And I'm like, but that's also the point. He's just supposed to be a mythical figure because it's not really his movie. It's the guy who has the access to him. What is he really supposed to do with that? What does it mean to be the guy who finds the guy? I'm excited for when we actually get to do a full-on Scout episode because we've touched on it so many times. But I guess the reason why I bring up that argument is the fact that that is another movie that, like, weirdly moved the dial and became meaningful to people who, like, care about cinema. And this film, and honestly, I think it might be the saddest thing at all, because we talk about there's nothing really lasting about this movie. There's nothing that really moves forward. But there is one thing in this movie that I really wish did, and that is Moira Kelly's character. Courtney is such a complex, like, female character that, like, we don't begin to see characters like her for at least another 15 years, like, being completely honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the respect that Monty shows for their friendship, and it really does take a lot of encouragement from Simon and some very clear signals from Courtney for Monty to even make the move that he does. And even then, the move he makes is not an offensive one. Like, he just, it is a great relationship for this type of film to be portraying at this time. There are not movies that are doing things like that.
Not only is it a great relationship, but the fact that she's so, like, sex positive as a female character, and nobody really gives her guff for that.
Well, and she has a ton of different conversations. It's not full on like Bechdel test stuff where she's talking to other women about this. That would be too far for a 90s movie. But the ways in which she is part of other conversations in this film that are not just about her relationship with Monty, right? Like, she is able to stand up to a lot of the political conversations and about the conversations about Harvard and about how, you know, about how Monty's pushing himself too hard and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of moments in this movie where the characters of this film, and I mean, to this point, Jeff and Everett also kind of delightfully fill kind of rather complex roles for what they're first kind of seen as, right? Not to automatically put Courtney in the character of the woman. It's just that in the 90s, that was very much where female characters were often slotted, right? But you have Everett, who is kind of the artist, right? And then you have Jeff, who, the only reason I called him the Republican is because that is what I would designate that character archetype, right? Is he is the one that's like, he's probably the one paying the bills on the house to make sure that the lights are still on. He's the one that is authoritarian in the house, right? Like, he is that there needs to be that odd couple-esque role for him to play, right?
To be the total jerk, he's kind of the Pip of the group, probably the most responsible.
Yeah.
Which, go listen to the Adam Sandler Cinematic Universe if you want to unlock the deeper meaning of that sentence. But
yeah, but they all get these really nice, complex storylines, and it's nice to see that Courtney is included in that. Yes, for sure.
Well, and especially something like the Jeffrey character, in terms of the fact that he is killing himself to write his thesis, while you have aloof Monty, who is like, clearly it is just coming to him because he has either the drive or the inspiration or just the je ne sais quoi required to construct that thesis. While Jeffrey has like, I have 1 page done. I have 1 page done of my thesis. And at that time, like, it is fall. He has an entire other semester. And the guy, honestly, before it got, I mean, I saw this movie a long time ago. So rewatching it to talk about it this week, like, it was a thing where I'm like, I know somebody dies in this movie. I'm kind of feeling like it's going to be Jeffrey. That he's going to kill himself because he cannot stand up to the pressure of Harvard. And of course, a lot of that is baggage from things like School Ties and Dead Poets Society. And the fact that, like, that's how this character ends up in these situations. He experiences the same sort of awakening that Monty experiences by coming into contact with Simon Wilder, but then it either ends up with him being so derailed that he doesn't complete his thesis, and then suddenly, oh my god, I've wasted all this time in my life, and I honestly don't know how I can go on, so they end up taking their own life. Like, it is just one of those things where I'm like, this guy, I don't want Josh Hamilton to kill himself. And thankfully, that's not what happens. He has just a really good, like, growth arc to understand where everybody else is coming from. Like, that moment where he's like, can I come when they're going to take Simon to go meet his son, who he abandoned at age, like, 2? Is like, it really, like, that's a cathartic moment. And it's a cathartic moment for the 5th build character who, honestly, every scene up to that point has just been him complaining.
I do think that the movie really wants us to understand that Monty's not necessarily smart, right? Jeff sees him as being like an egghead and able to pump out all these pages and blah blah blah. But one of the first things that we actually learn about Monty is he is phenomenal at memorization. I won't go so far as like them labeling it like what are they called? What's the bullshit memory?
He doesn't have a photographic memory.
He's not photographic, but he starts reciting his thesis from memory to his advisor, and even his advisor in the moment goes, whoa, like off the top of your head, like really, you're just gonna drop it? And he's just like, yeah, why the fuck not? Like he doesn't seem surprised by it, right? And I think that that's where, and then like when we see him in class, he's not able to stand up to Buchanan, right? Like when Buchanan starts like throwing like complex, not even complex really by the nature of the script, but in the world of like the ways in which he complicates the question completely throws Monty off, because Monty is ready to just give him textbook answers. Monty is ready to just regurgitate as a student.
He's not ready to improvise.
He's not really thinking for himself, which I think is the other reason why I hesitate to call him the Republican one, as much as he might be spouting these kinds of right-wing ideals in the beginning of the movie. It's because he's simply just regurgitating the shit from the world around him. Right?
Not only is he regurgitating
what too much.
He's
he's
not just regurgitating, he also is very good at reading people. Monty, for all of his ability to like memorize and to like study and glean what is necessary, he's really good at reading people and knowing what they want to hear in that moment. So he is just appealing to Buchanan because he knows that if he's his thesis advisor, then that means that he will be able to graduate with honors. And honestly, at the beginning of the film, that's his goal, is to graduate from Harvard with a degree in government with honors.
Right.
So he's just doing what has to be done. It's actually, I mean, if this movie had come out 10 years later, it would be a really interesting exploration in like, is the education system actually teaching students, or is it just turning them into rote memorization machines who can vomit back what we expect to hear from them?
Well, and I think that that's part of where Jeff's arc then slowly starts to come from. And again, the movie is not complex enough to really kind of go too far into any of this. But when we get to see Monty finally realize that he is not smart, that he really has just been regurgitating the same shit that's been told to him his whole life, and he needs to start like figuring shit out on his own. And it's Simon who's teaching him this kind of improvisational lifestyle, right? Like Simon is teaching him all of this, but Jeff is secondhand getting to then watch Monty kind of come to terms with the fact that like oh, I'm not really good at this. I'm really good at this one aspect of this, but at the end of the day, I'm not actually getting out of this what I need to. Like, and I think that's what also then changes Jeff, because we are led to believe in the beginning how jealous he is that Monty is able to just kind of do this, get 10 chapters done. But the reason he's able to get 10 chapters done is because none of it's his own work.
Yeah.
Jeff is getting caught up because so much of what Jeff is trying to do is his own voice, right? And like, in a weird way, like, this is the most relatable part of the entire fucking college aspect of this movie for me, is this whole back and forth between like the idea of memorization versus thinking for oneself, and like what do we really want to get out of this experience. And so yeah, I think you're right. I think like 10 years later they would have focused more on that, but that is in this movie.
Oh, it's definitely in the movie. But it's subtle. And that's the unfortunate thing that I do notice in so many of these Brendan Fraser films, is that they are so surface, but I don't know if it's the nature of the people that Brendan Fraser is lucky to find himself working with, or just by the nature of like the way that he is performing them, that like this beautiful subtlety gets baked into the crust of it. Because there's that great moment where Simon is working on his obituary where he's like, I thought I'd take a page out of your book and do a little studying before I wrote it. And like, that is weirdly, like, it is meant kind of as a compliment, but it's backhanded in the fact of like, this is what you were doing before you knew me. Right?
Yeah.
Like this is the time where I get to tell you, this is the lesson I taught you, is how to form your own voice and opinions based on the knowledge you gather, rather than just repeat what you've heard.
Oh yeah, they use every trick in the book to make you really think about how smart Simon really must be, including a doublespeak, right? When he says lines like that, but you know he means something, like he means the opposite of it and stuff like that. It is his dialogue is so manufactured, but much like when we talk about with Brendan Fraser and the ways in which he elevates a lot of his roles, and the reason why you love Joe Pesci so much in this one is he elevates that material, right? And I think, to your point about that subtlety, I do think it is something that actors like Brendan Fraser, I'm not going to sit here and act like he's the only one in the world that can do this, but I think that it is guys like him, like Joe Pesci, hell, like Patrick Dempsey and Josh Hamilton and Moira Kelly. Everybody in this movie that is acting is taking pretty subpar material and just acting the hell out of it. That's exactly what I mean when I say that, is there's subtlety in these moments that otherwise don't earn it. There's not, like, the dialogue doesn't imply what the acting does, but the acting is implying a much more interesting story. And that is when you've got a really good actor on your hand, and you know that you've got maybe not such a great everything else around them, is that when you're noticing stuff like that, and you can't figure out, like, is this movie just too subtle for me to care? And it's like, no, the actor is just really good, which is where that subtlety's coming from. So you're recognizing like a symptom, but you're not really identifying the disease. The disease is that the script for this movie is just kind of surface.
Yeah.
And so his ability Brendan Fraser's ability to take that and create subtlety within it is just a testament to how good of an actor he is.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to say that he's the only one who's doing it. It is, I guess, just by the nature of this 8-year-long journey we've been on, studying the work of Brendan Fraser, that like I can identify those moments where there's subtlety. And when part of that comes from, I listened to and I read some articles about Airheads as we prepared to talk about it again, and those people who are like, oh, this movie has nothing to say, and I'm just like, oh my god, this movie has so much to say. But like, I understand why you might not get there, because what it's saying is not plastered in neon lights. And the stuff that is plastered in neon lights in something like With Honors is not like the deeper message of this film. Like,
no, and a movie has to, the other important thing to remember about both Airheads and this, right?
Yeah.
Is like the movie has to earn that deep of a look. You and I are much more forgiving audience members than a lot of other people in this regard. I think a lot of people by this point know that about us. We'll find a hell of a time in any pile of shit, right? Like, yeah. we are happy, right, when we are pigs and shit. But not everybody in the world is, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to admit that, like, yeah, we're pulling this stuff out, and it's enjoyable for us to talk about the subtlety of the acting in this movie that is otherwise mediocre. For other people, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Like great, Brendan Fraser acts really well in this kind of like, 5 out of 10 film, then I'm not, that does nothing for me. Whereas for you and I, Brendan Fraser acting the hell out of this 5 out of 10 script makes the movie itself feel more like a 6, 7 out of 10 film, right? like he elevates this movie for us because he is doing so much work with little around him.
Yeah.
Right. And like, that's great. But not everybody.
But not
is
everybody's
willing
gonna find
give it
that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like nobody. And it's their and it's your right as an audience member to say this isn't working for me. Like we're sitting here on the precipice of possibly, by all accounts, possibly the greatest superhero movie ever to come out in The Flash. And I right now could not tell you whether or not I'm going to give it the time of day. Even when it becomes a home release, I just don't know if I'm going to bother seeing that movie. And I'm not saying that everybody else out there needs to do that. People can decide for themselves what they want to do with it. I'm not saying this makes the movie shit. Maybe it'll come out. Maybe it'll be fantastic. I just don't care. Right. And I think that's where we fall into a lot with a lot of these older movies. I'm thinking about what you said earlier, where like people just 10 years younger than us have a really hard time getting on board with some of these movies in the 90s because they don't earn your trust. Yeah. Movies in the 90s just kind of expected you to just be on board with them. And like, that's kind of par for the course with a lot of pop culture in the 90s. We were just so convinced that we were the shit here in the United States in the 90s that like we didn't give anybody a reason to really care. We were just like, well, you want to see this movie because it's a movie and it's in theaters, right? Joe Pesci's in it. Why would you not want to come see Joe Pesci? We got that Brendan kid. He's got big eyes. It's great. Come see this movie. And it's like, no, movies need to have something. So I don't think that this movie is actually lacking anything. I think it's just that this movie was made at a time in which movies didn't really have to have much to them to get made.
Yeah. It's a product of its time. It is definitely a product of its time. I guess the thing that was interesting to me, especially coming off of something like Hairbrained last week, right, is Harvard is super personified as a villain in Hairbrained, right? It is what Eli is railing against, is a rejection from Harvard, when it is what he has wanted his whole life. So then I'm like, oh, we're going to watch this movie where, like, Harvard's going to be a hero. And then as it goes on, I'm like, no, Harvard is also the villain of this piece. Like, and then I think about all the movies that Harvard is in, and I'm like, Harvard's just kind of the villain in 90s cinema. And then going forward, like...
It's really easy shorthand for Republican shithead. Like that's really what we're getting at. Is like it's a really easy answer for spoiled rich kids. Is Harvard? You put that on screen and everybody immediately is just like boo. Like, and I don't know how it became that. There's somebody out there that's probably written a study on that. A lot of Yale grads working for fucking National Lampoon or something.
Well, I think National Lampoon's from Harvard, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. That was the bad joke.
That was the bad joke. But no, you're right. Yale is all these performers, and it's definitely there. I mean, in School Ties, like Matt Damon's like, oh God, if I went to Harvard, imagine what my parents would say. And it's like with all the, and he says some really negative language there. But like for David, Harvard would be a freaking dream in School Ties. Yeah. Ooh. Huh. Yeah, I was excited to be at Harvard, especially like it was sort of my last big hurrah before the world shut down in 2020 is Will and I went and visited Harvard because I'd like to see it. And I get that, right? It is this centuries old institution and Will's visiting. So like, yeah, we'll check out Harvard. And what did we end up doing? We ended up basically getting a cup of coffee and that calling it a day. But then, like, you recognize...
And you went and watched the Tom Green, Jason Lee classic, Stealing Harvard.
No, we actually drove to New York and had just a bunch of misadventures along the way. It was a wonderful time. It was the last time I got to see Will in person, and it was excellent. It was this excellent time. But then, like, while they're walking on Harvard, I'm like, oh, I've been there. The whole scene where he steals the newspaper and is selling them, and I'm like, I've been there. I like that's a place.
Yeah, I've gotten off of that T stop. I know exactly where they are.
Like it's this kind of cool thing. And then you think, like, they're in Boston, right? And then, like, School Ties, and it weirdly does come from the connection of School Ties of like my mother, like, we're going to go to the diner that they go to in School Ties when I'm 8 years old. And she thinks that's a fun thing to do in the summer. And it was. It ended up being this fun thing because it was a movie that I had seen, probably definitely too young, right? I'm 6 years old watching School Ties. Let's talk about why Devin has a bit of a problem with authority in the 3 easy steps. But yeah, and you talk about that college experience and what really speaks to you. That moment where he is going to recite his thesis from memory, and just the beginning of his thesis too. Like, it's not like the guy's like, all right, I'm looking at page 36. What does it say beginning at the 5th line? Like, it's not magical memory sort of recall. He knows the beginning of his thesis, but the response from the professor of, I don't know if it's preparedness or you just trying to show off, like that moment happened to me in, of all things, a musical theater course. Where, like, did you ever take the musical theater course at University of Rhode Island? Like the singing thing that they did?
No, not at URI. I didn't have to take it at URI because I was not an acting major.
Right, that's true. I just took it because I liked singing and performing, and I had extra credit hours on my thing. So I took that course. I'm in there with a bunch of people who had literally just performed in a musical that, like, I was stage tech on, and I go up, and she's like, these are the songs you can. I feel like I've told this story before, but, like, it really connected with me again that, like, oh, this is a thing that, like, Hollywood thinks happens, and it happened to me. That's kind of weird. We're told we could do Seasons of Love from Rent or Try to Remember from the Fantastics. So
knowing what I know now from You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, that was the only thing I remember from seeing, because we were invited to the finals for that class every year.
Yeah.
That I did attend, and I can't tell you how many times in a row I watched that fucking song.
Yeah. Well, which one? Which from You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown?
Isn't Knowing What I Know Now, because that's the one where he's like, you can't sell your brother for $1, like that.
Yeah,
one?
Right, but that wasn't. No, it was Try to Remember from the Fantastics. Those were the two options that were given to us.
Oh, given to you, yes.
Yeah, like,
but
yeah, no, I know. No, I'm sure that they also do Thank You for the Music by from Mamma Mia. Like that was how we ended it.
No, what's the big one from Annie Get Your Gun is Anything You Can Do, right? Is that
Anything You Can Do? Yeah, that was always one of them. I mean, like it was really early on in the class where like we did it. It felt new. We did the song from Shenandoah, Next to Love and I Like Fightin'. Like, that's a crazy song for a bunch of, like, men to do in college. It was weird. But we're given those choices, so immediately I'm like, I'm not going to do Seasons of Love from Rent. Like, that's just, I'm not going to sing that song. That seems like this thing. So I'm going to do the Fantastic song, and I don't know the song. I don't know the song at all, but I have the sheet music in front of me, and I teach myself it before we go. So then I go up, and it's time for me to perform so that the professor knows, like, my ability, and I go up there with the sheet music, and then I proceed to sing the song without ever looking at the sheet music. And afterwards, she slams down the lid of the piano, and she's like, everybody outside, I need to speak with Devin. And I'm just like, I don't know what the fuck I did, right? Like, do I not belong in here? Did I, like, misread the sheet music? I'm thinking a million things. And then she gives me a rash of shit for showing off. Like, for having that.
You did great, Devin, but did you have to put the N-word in 6 times? Even once was too much.
No, it was the fact she's like, you go up there with that sheet music, and then you willfully never look at it. And I'm like, lady, I just taught myself this song. I had it here as a crutch. It's nice that you thought I like, did that to show off and to like, flex. But no, I was terrified right now. And I'm Devin Decker. I'm like the epitome of confidence. That is why I had this paper in my hand. She did not believe me at all. And it was this really weird thing where I'm like, I'm not going to leave this class though, because that was the reaction I got from the professor on the first day. I got an A. I got an A overall. I upset her.
With honors?
No, not with honors. I wish. No, and I continued to upset her throughout because, like, she had, like, this big music person to come in to judge us for our midterm, And she's like, this is the song I want you to do. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the other song, though, because I've already been judged on that first song. I want to see this other song that I've been teaching myself that you also gave me that was supposed to be for the midterm. Like, you're not going to dictate that I have to do the one that makes you look good. I'm going to do the other one. And she was like, and afterwards the judge was like, oh, like that was excellent. And I was told that this was going to be this like very important performance. Like she was really excited for you to show it off to me, as she is in the corner seething because I didn't do the song she told me to do. I did the one that I had been initially assigned for the assignment.
People like you are the reason that society falls apart.
Yeah, I know that. And I'm sorry to like, but it is just like, it brought back all of these moments where like maybe I wasted parts of my college education, and I'll like be the first person to admit that, but I think I learned a lot about life and the type of person that I wanted to be, so that a movie like this, right, which again I saw in 94, there's no doubt that I saw it in 94. We had the black box at the time. It had to have been on like Showtime or HBO or one of those, and I remember so much of this film, so much that I had forgotten to. I'd forgotten Moira Kelly just like completely, which is not really surprising when you consider the fact that I was 8 years old when I saw this movie for the first time. And I love Moira Kelly though. I'm just such a big fan. You talked about watching The West Wing in one of our quizzes. Like, is she still there? Is Mandy still there?
I mean, while I'm watching, yeah. I don't know what happens with her character, but she's a fucking delight in the first season.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She's absolutely wonderful. The Cutting Edge, which is Moira Kelly in hockey, like all these things I love, and I'd forgotten she was in it. But like, I get why this film probably established something in how I was going to approach the education system, and then watching it again today in my 30s, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I could totally like. These are moments that happened in my life. In this film that is almost 30 years old. That's weird.
Well, I'll never forget how you found that homeless guy living under the stage of Jay's studio. No,
it would have to have been Will Theater.
Nope, not Will, but under Jay's
there
studio.
Was nothing under Jay.
Boiler room that he was living in, and then he threatened to burn your thesis.
Oh man, that
and
little
you said,
house.
Will, I will take you under my wing if you give me my thesis back.
That little boiler room that he is living in is gorgeous. Like it is
nothing. It was like fucking huge down there, and he had the heat of the boiler must have made that place insanely warm.
But he also had like a little room that looked like it reminded me of Stephen Hyde's room in that 70s show.
Well, it's the same thing with the van that he ends up in. Is like, man, I would fucking love to live in that little van in some giant house's backyard. Like, I'll do that.
Yeah, right. It's.
Man, these homeless people, they know something we don't, Devin, I tell you.
No. You're learning the wrong lesson, Sejin. No.
See, that's the other big danger about this film. Yeah. Is because it does not take an actual stance on much of anything besides like the obvious wins of like, hey, maybe don't treat homeless people like shit, is like it doesn't really give you any answers, right? It's very happy to wag its finger, but then it doesn't ever want to do anything.
Yeah. It is.
Which is why I don't think this is a Republican film. I think it's a Democratic film. Welcome to my TED Talk.
No, I don't think it's a Republican film either. I think it is honestly that man transitioning and understanding the other side of it and then being like, I think this is what I was all along. I just never got to see it in practice. And the people who were telling me what to think at the time, all they were showing me was Republican ideals and Republican ways to approach the world. And
and we know for a fact that that's what this movie is trying to tell us because of something that Devin's already hinted at, but the term founding parents and the fact that it is something that Monty used in his thesis from the get-go.
Yeah. We are hitting a time of political correctness in America.
But the fact that Monty is willing to do that before he ever meets Simon, before of any other change, like that is a term that he uses, and that is our handhold to believe that there is something in Monty that can be changed. And honestly, I think it's part of why Simon is willing to put up with some shit and help fix him. Like, is because Simon has read his entire thesis.
Yeah.
And I think Simon sees in it that there is something in Monty that doesn't believe the bullshit he's spewing in the thesis itself. And so he's willing to spend time with him.
And there's that beautiful moment, again, maybe too subtle for people who are watching it. Maybe you miss it, where he goes,
or maybe you get it and you're just on board. Don't be an asshole.
No. It's
maybe it's a little too subtle for you, but I don't know if you saw.
Well,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The movie does that. We don't have to.
No, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, where this doesn't become some beloved film in its subtlety, right? Because that moment where he's like, here's chapter 2 back. And he gives him a full chapter, which looks to be about 10 pages, right? Conservatively. Liberally, it's probably more like 14.
But your bad jokes aside, that does work out mathematically for 88 pages.
I know, I understand. Thank you. The bad jokes are why you're here, right? If you're listening to the Say Report for the high quality content, the bad jokes are part of it, right? We need to show you the bad so you can appreciate the good. We're like a parent in that way. I don't know what I'm doing. But where he's like, I read chapter 2 and he's like, you're talking out of the wrong end in a lot of that stuff. Like, that is such a good jab to be like, please challenge yourself. Clearly you're intelligent. Clearly you have a heart. You can't believe these things that you're spewing. And you know what else is just talking about this movie? His goal. What is Monty's goal in life besides to graduate Harvard with honors? Where does he go from here?
Right.
Like,
I don't think there's an answer to that question because the movie doesn't care. The movie does not care about before or after. It gives you a little bit of before, just enough for you to feel bad when Simon dies, right? And to understand why you should be sad when Monty's on the phone with his mom. But other than that, like, we don't go much further than that. Like, they introduced almost this weird parallel between Simon and the way that Simon treated his kids versus Monty and the way that his dad treated him and his mom. So, like, there is kind of almost that. But again, the movie doesn't put his foot down one way or the other about that. Right. This movie is afraid to take a real stance for fear, I think, of offending an audience. And maybe this gets to kind of just to bookend this entire conversation, kind of gets to what you were saying about how this movie feels like it might have been written 2 or 3 years previously under a Republican regime that really mistreated people like Simon and created possible monsters like Monty. And this is a fairy tale in which we get to see one of these monsters actually be saved. Yeah. And that's a great story and that's wonderful, but it is a fairy tale in a lot of ways. And I think that might be, the biggest knock I can have against this movie, as much as I can give it shit about how nothing happens and it's inconsequential and it doesn't move the dial in terms of art or anything like that, I think the worst thing that this movie does is this movie is super emblematic of exactly the kind of shit that you hear on Fox News today about the idea that Hollywood is full of agenda-pushing liberals. It's like, this movie is kind of a shining example of something like that, right? Like the smugness that, like, South Park will call out guys like Hillary Clinton and George Clooney for, right? Like, this movie is pretty emblematic of exactly that kind of thing. And, like, as someone that's on that side of the fence in a lot of these conversations, I am gleeful and enjoy this film. But I think that the reason that this movie does not get remembered is because it's not challenging to people like me, and it's upsetting to people that are not like me, and so they're not going to hold it up, right? So, like, I don't get anything out of it because it's not offensive to me. It's too offensive for a certain group of people in this world that are more than happy to write off films when they're offensive to them. So, like, this movie has no audience. This movie has no like, joyful cult following or anything like that, you know?
It also doesn't have a draw. The way that you just put that, right? And this is coming off of the discussion on Airheads where Michael Lehman did not want Brendan Fraser to play the lead role in that because he's like, I don't think he can do anything besides Encino Man, right? Completely writing off School Ties at the time. Like, is Brendan Fraser the sell for this movie? Because up to this point, all we've seen from Brendan Fraser is School Ties and Encino Man. And
it's Brendan Fraser to people our age, like not our age then, but our age now. Like if we were 30 when this movie came out, Brendan Fraser is the sell to us. But then to our mom and dad, it's Joe Pesci. Like those are the two ways in which they're marketing this film, right? And those are the only 2 ways that they're marketing this film.
Yeah, those have to be the 2 ways. But then imagine you're going to see this movie for Joe Pesci in 1994, right? Are you satiated at the end of it? with what you get from Joe Pesci, or is it like kind of just enough? But then you also have to deal with the kid from Encino Man.
No, I want him to knock some fucking heads.
Yeah,
right? like there's this weird like who Joe Pesci is at this time is you want him to be this witty guy with a biting edge, and he's witty in this movie, but in a lot of ways, much like everything else in this film,
super
he's very soft compared to what he usually is, right?
I mean, the best scene, and I'm saying, hands down, Pesci's best scene in this movie is when he is in front of the judge and he's like, I'd like a jury of my peers. And he's just fucking Vincent LaGuardia Gambini in that moment. But with a beard. Am I wrong?
He isn't. Yep. Like, because I think the big thing, the difference in that moment between the two of them is motivation. Yeah. So it's funny because when he first stands up in front of the judge, I had that exact moment where I was like, oh, we're just going to fall into My Cousin Vinny for a minute here. I'm down with that. But then the ways in which he is casually like arguing for each individual defense, and like, it's not really a matter if he cares whether or not he wins or loses. Right? He's like, and in that, he's not giving up. He's thinking, I can go as far as I want. Because if I lose, I was always set up to lose. But if I win, it'll look fucking hilarious. Right? Which is not the way that Vinny operates at all. Yeah. Like, we have not done a deep dive on My Cousin Vinny, and we probably fucking should, because God, I love that fucking movie. But like, Vinny is very calculated. And like, there's very much an attitude in that film that he's subtle up until the moment he doesn't have to be. Right? Whereas Simon just goes for the fucking jugular when he gets up there. That is the one difference between the two of them. That being said, the wit and delivery and like, I mean, Joe Pesci is just, God love the man, but he is falling back into an archetype for himself in that moment.
Yeah. And, you know, it's cool that we're looking at this movie. I don't know if I can watch it right now. It feels weird to watch it while the writer's strike is going on, but like Bupkis just came out, where Joe Pesci is playing Pete Davidson's father. So I'm very excited to watch that eventually.
Have you seen not I Heard You Paint Houses? What's the name of it? The Irishman. Have you seen The Irishman?
I
Heard
have.
You Paint Houses is the name of the book that is based
I have. I wasn't a huge fan of that movie, I'll be honest with you.
She is so good in it.
It doesn't change the fact that
when he first meets De Niro on the, or like he's met him before, but he pulls over because he recognizes him on the side of the road, and De Niro is fixing the truck, and Pesci just walks over, and they have this beautiful moment where like Pesci comes down to his level and starts talking about what might be wrong with it. I love that movie. So like, this is a biased opinion, but there are scenes in that movie that remind you why Joe Pesci was always one of your favorite actors.
Oh yeah. I mean, even when he's the villain in the Home Alone films, the scenes where it's just the wet bandits not getting brutally assaulted by Kevin McAllister, they're great. Their dynamic is fantastic.
The Say Report, the only podcast out there that comes down on the side of the wet bandits.
Or the Sticky Bandits. Let's not forget who they become in Home Alone, Lost in New York, Escape from New York. That'd be a hell of a movie, huh? Kevin McAllister with a freaking eye patch like Snake Plissken.
Oh, and then Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern end up having to go in to get him out.
Yeah. I think we've hit that.
Trump still shows up for like 5 seconds.
Oh yeah, but you know, he gets his head impaled on a spike, right? And then they take over Trump Tower, and it'll be our base of operation.
Is holding it. It's fine. It's great.
Good times, great oldies. The Say Report.
Go watch this movie.
Check the film out.
Now knowing all of the shit that we really kind of like didn't click with us in this movie, understand that I still say go see this movie and go watch this movie.
Yeah, it is. It's enjoyable, and I think that you can find something to connect with it. There's a lot going on in this film. Everybody has something bubbling underneath the surface, and I think and if you've seen the movie before, maybe watch it again, because you might notice something that you didn't the last time.
Right.
There's a lot. There's a lot of humanity in this film, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, it is such a product of the 90s and just what we were just willing to accept in our entertainment at the time.
Yeah.
I do also, I mean, we didn't talk about it in Airheads, but I want to talk about it, the fact that they asked for 67 copies of Moby Dick. So the whale theme was alive and well with Airheads. There was no whale iconography in this one though, right? Am I wrong in that?
No, this one ties in because of all the school stuff, and we have the wise older figure that is trying their best, and of course in the end, does he succeed? Does he fail? We don't really know. We just get a little bit of a cathartic ending with Monty. A lot of this is going to be very reminiscent of what we see in films yet to come this month.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's also a little bit of gods and monsters in it, in terms of the fact that the older gentleman is sort of trying to shape the clay, not to be a fucking asshole about the fact that that's literally his character's name in Gods and Monsters, that Monty represents before he becomes baked and unable to be shaped and changed in any sort of
I thought you were talking
way.
about Gore Vidal and the rumors that run rampant about his probable homosexuality, including a long-running relationship with Tennessee Williams, who he ran off to Paris with for a few years. But, that's talking out of school. We don't have there's no evidence of that.
No, come on, Stephen, where's your honor? I was talking about Joe Pesci as the Magneto role in this particular relationship. But yes, you're also not wrong about those very true rumors you just shared about Gore Vidal.
The king writer running off to Paris with his boyfriend. It was a little too on the nose for me to ignore this time around. I will say that we do know why Madonna is the big get for this movie, is because the director of this film 2 years previously directed like a Madonna docu-musical.
Yeah.
So like that's got to be the reason why she does this song, right?
Alec
Keshishian, I believe is how you say his name.
Yeah.
Keshishian. But Madonna, Truth or Dare, he directs in '91. So like right. That's how you end up with Madonna 2 years later doing this. And like, dude's still going. He did a Selena Gomez one a couple of years ago that was like pretty big. Like there's guy is out there still working.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. There's also the fact that Madonna is at this weird moment in her career where she is doing movie songs. And it makes perfect sense when you consider she's this like product of the 80s and how big like having the theme to a song from a movie in the 80s really was. When you look at like Footloose and Danger Zone for Kenny Loggins and just what it meant at the time. So she has Live to Tell, which ends up being the song in At Close Range. And then she has This Used to Be My Playground for A League of Their Own. So then it only like makes sense that she would try again for this film and do something like I'll Remember.
That's another video that Keshishian directs for her, by the way.
Yeah.
Just because you mentioned that, I will say that he has a big connection to her as far as the director goes.
Yeah.
So like her being the one that has the big song for this movie, not surprising. And then at this point in her career, not surprising that she also gets the nom for that song too.
Yeah. Well, not an Oscar nom. I will say that it is specifically Grammy and MTV Film and Video Award, which is not to be denied. Like, it's still a nomination. It's still a judging body giving acknowledgement to it. But it is another...
Most might say that a Grammy as a musician is much more desirable than any other award.
Right, exactly. But I think when it comes down to... I mean, I just named two that come to me like... As soon as I heard I'll Remember, I'm like, oh, This Used to Be My Playground and frickin' Live to Tell. Like those other two movies that, I mean, she's in those ones. The closest she gets to this movie is when Simon is taking the shit and Jeff is running up like a 5-year-old to take a piss after driving back to Boston. And he's like, are you taking a shit? And he's like, does Madonna take her clothes off? And I'm just like, oh my God, a Madonna song after that comment? That seems strange. But it's a film that's worth watching, which is, I think, what we've said a bunch of times. And I mean, there's a whole other second half to this, so we should probably let the people go so that they can listen to you beat me again in trivia and us talk more about Brendan Fraser in an episode of Scrubs, right? Specifically the My Hero episode, season 1, episode 23, if you want to take the break to watch it before you hear us talking about it. And do you want to tell the people, just remind them of the movie that we're going to be talking about next episode, Sejim?
Now you got Glory Days up in my head.
That's the movie.
Is that the movie?
Yeah, we're watching Glory Days.
Fantastic. Then that's what we're doing next. I thought that we were doing that as a special episode.
No, we're doing Dazed and Confused as the special episode.
Yeah. See, we got too many days doing this thing. Also, I wanted to just to give a quick shout, just because I did see Guardians this past week. I forgot that we did not talk about that, and that will be something talked about in June. Yes? Yes?
Oh, I wanted to talk about it as soon as you got home from it and do another mini review episode. But
I needed to take some time because, as I said to you on Discord, that movie affected me.
Yeah, it affected you. You are affected.
So yeah, just wanted to make sure that that note was out there, just because anybody out there that's clocking when we record this versus the whole universe. Yeah. There you go. There's your timestamp.
We did both go see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And yeah, we'll give you that. We'll give you some time to go catch up before we talk about it. Because, yeah, no, it is something that I think about at least for 5 minutes every day since watching it. So, yeah. And again, if anything happens with the writer's strike, and as we send you off to ourselves, the reminder that we're going to be in Hyrule pretty much all weekend. But again, that is something that we will save the discussion for until June. So, like, we have all the pins, people. Hopefully we'll remember to get back to them. But until then, enjoy us with Quizmaster Will Fournier talking about Scrubs. Thanks for being here for part 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejan Sarowick. Sejan?
Hey, everybody. What's going on? So Dev, remind me what we're rolling out of here.
Oh, I gotta tell you, Sejan, it is an honor to be here with you today.
Okay.
You are here with honors.
Thanks. Thank you for that.
After we have just
opened the door for this,
discussed with honors. But now that we've gotten all that, like, maudlin Joe Pesci, I want to go to Harvard and graduate with honors stuff out of the way, it's time for a quiz. And you know what that means. We have the freshly caffeinated Will Fournier, our Quizmaster General, here joining today. Will?
Oh, hi, everybody.
Hi, Will.
Oh,
you might remember me from other quizzes.
Such as the big fat... Nope, not that one.
The Brendan Fraser quiz of Brendan Fraser.
Big fat Brendan Fraser quiz of the year.
Yeah, there we go.
We have decided to not call it the Big Fat Brendan Fraser quiz for obvious reasons.
I don't want to deal with Jimmy Carr in any fashion.
I mean, there's that, but there's also the fact that he was Big Fat Brendan Fraser in The Whale. So we've gone with the Brendan Fraser quiz of Brendan Fraser to, I don't know, to Jungle.
This time it's personal.
This time it is personal, because there can only be one winner. And do you want to remind the people of the scores, Sejan, since, you know, things...
Was I supposed to be keeping track of the scores? I'm sorry.
No, my God, how are you in the lead? No, it should be Will. But if I were in the catbird seat the way that you are, I might even get him tattooed on my hand.
Is that a hint? Five.
No.
Are we doing overall scores? Or
yeah, overall score.
Go.
This is going to be the third part of the quiz that will follow our discussion of the second part of the Brendan Fraser trilogy on Scrubs. So, you know, it's all wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. We're here after just recording our episode about Gods and Monsters. So I feel like I should apologize. I feel like I was like just north of being inappropriate in my descriptions of Brendan Fraser in that film, but it was all meant complimentary. He looked good in that movie.
Devin, I am choosing to look at it as you celebrated a lot about that man's physique.
I celebrated the movie.
I mean, deservedly.
Yeah, and I wish that we could tell you anything about With Honors, but, you know, the way the sausage is made, the way the salami whiskey gets made is out of space and time. That's what happens when your Quizmaster is in Australia. Fucking spiders or whatever they do over there.
I also highly appreciate you throwing back to something that was said when we weren't recording. And that's wonderful.
It's fun, right? It's for the Wikipedia. And then maybe I don't even know. Maybe I was recording, Will. You don't know.
Oh, yeah, you're because Hugh Jackman was listening, so you must have been recording.
Oh, if Hugh Jackman is listening, Hugh Jackman is recording. These are the
Yes.
inside jokes ever put to digital tape. Will,
read the IMDb trivia and you'll understand what we're talking about.
Will, so you are the Quizmaster General. You are the one who probably has our overall scores. Let's remind the people where we stand going into the third part.
Well, so we so far have done a general Brendan Fraser trivia, as we like to start things off, and then we've moved on to a little more in-depth focus on the first of our Scrubs trilogy in My Occurrence. So if we're including the previous years, currently it is Devon 26.5, Sejan 28.5.
Yeah, excellent.
If we're not including previous years, it's 6.5 to 8.5.
Basically, last year was a wash.
Yeah, last year was a good old-fashioned tie. So we're just going to work on what happens this year.
Right. But before we get to the quiz, the only reason we convinced Will to come back, at least the story that we're telling, is if we agreed to finally celebrate Brendan Fraser's 3 appearances on Scrubs. So we're here, we're smack dab in the middle of it with My Hero. I'm just going to be the guy who says this. Weakest episode of the trilogy?
I mean, I don't know. It's a weird to think about these as a trilogy in any fashion, first and foremost. Like, right? Like, that's just not the way that this goes. I think that what this is this is the most Scrubs, like, season 1 out of the 3. I feel like the first half of this one, which was not my screw up, that's the third
My
one,
Occurrence.
My Occurrence. I feel like My Occurrence is one of those episodes in season 1 Scrubs that really shows you what that show could be and does eventually become. My Hero is them snapping back, like just overcorrecting back in the other direction, right? Like the really silly stuff with this is the one with the underdog stuff, and this is the one with like the visuals specifically. I love anytime the blanks show up on Scrubs. I think that they're just a fucking ball. And this is, you know, like when I say that this episode gets back to kind of the formula of Scrubs, like I mean that with all of my heart. Like I love that, right? Like I love Scrubs, so like that's not an insult. It's just that of the 2 that we have talked about so far, I feel like the first half of this one really elevates what Scrubs can eventually become. My Hero is just kind of just like it's a fluff episode, it's a filler episode, despite the fact finishing off another episode, right?
Yeah, it's the second part that doesn't... I mean, how often do sequels stand up to their originals? But it feels like they almost got too excited about having Brendan Fraser in the first one. They were like, we better focus back on the normal cast because we've done our Brendan Fraser thing. Even though he's still here, we should probably talk about everybody else and catch you up on what they were doing, which isn't miles away from what we were seeing because they were all doing the same kind of thing. But it needs to be... It feels like a bit of a reset. I say reset back to what Scrubs is.
Yeah, and like this first season especially, we really should like be adamant that this is a show that went on for 8 years, right? And this is in that first kind of like real, it's still discovering itself. And one of the big things that goes on a lot in this season is that the kind of like saccharine nature of this show that is, you know, part and parcel with the formula for sitcoms in general. Like Scrubs is no stranger to it. And this episode wallows in it, right? Like these moments of just like piano plays and like look down the camera with like Vaseline on the lens type shit. Like there's just it feels a little hokey, right? Like and when it's celebrating that Scrubs in general, it's at its best. And I think that's episode 1 of this too. When it's not celebrating that, when it's just falling flat, that's the second episode. That's My Hero.
Yeah, and I think this is still in... I mean, if you've listened to any of the Scrubs rewatch podcast that Zach Braff and Donald Fraser do, they had Brendan Fraser on for these episodes to talk about, you know, being on Scrubs and what they did. But they all both fully admitted this is very early on when, as you said, still finding their feet, working out what the show is going to be, and they're also something that you will notice disappear as you get into season 2. Those heavy sound effects when the camera pans or when something happens.
Yeah.
There's like a whoosh noise as they all look around,
noises,
or there's like a random bits and pieces, and they're like, that disappeared in season 2 because they just kind of like, it's weird we're doing that. And they just slowly phased it out and never spoke about it again.
But
this is very much in that place.
The ways in which John C. McGinley and really gets to really shine in this episode, I think is really cool. But then what happens is that we then get, my screw up, the third in this that we'll talk about next time, and it trumps that 100%, right? It is like, if the reason to celebrate this episode is the actually getting to see John C. McGinley and Dr. Cox really kind of evolve as a character, but then they do that even better the next time Brendan Fraser comes back, so it's not even really worth focusing on that, right? Like, any of the good stuff in this episode is done better in the other 2 episodes of this trilogy.
Yeah, and it's weird that you can't really say, like, as I said, they are finding their feet, they're working out, but like, by the time they get to the next 2 My Screw Up, when they're a few seasons later, they obviously have found their characters. They know them so well. They've been doing it for 4 years or whatever it was now.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, oh, that's cool. That's why they're better in the next one. You go, but if you look back an episode, they were better then. So it's weird that this, I guess, maybe, not to say the script was bad, because it still had some really good stuff to work with, but whether it was just, okay, we'll get through this episode and then we'll do the next one.
Well, and I think the nature of the sitcom, right? Like the idea that you're gonna have those ups and downs. There's gonna be those episodes that don't move the plot along enough for you. There's gonna be those episodes that the characters seem a little off, because it's hard, man. It's hard making a series, especially Scrubs, especially at this time when like 20 to 24 episodes a season is expected, right? We now have kind of really leaned more into like the 13 episode half season is really where you want to like put your effort, but like that was not the case in 2002 when this is coming out, right?
True, very true. I have to disagree. I don't want to be that person who disagrees, but what this episode
supporting your opinion that this was the weakest episode, so now I feel a little like the rug was pulled. But go
ahead.
No.
No. But the reason why it's the weakest episode, you guys say that it's finding its feet and all of those things about it, and it's stumbling in those. This episode, weirdly, of almost all of them, feels so. I can't say forgotten, because one thing that happens in this episode is definitely carried forward, but in terms of the storytelling of the show and what happens in this episode, 2 significant things happen in this episode that made me pause and scratch my head and say they didn't know what they were doing. And I would almost, and I can do this because they talk about Wings in this episode, and in season 2, episode 2 of Wings, George Wendt appeared as Nord Peterson, which connects me to Cheers, season 1, episode 16, The Boys in the Bar, where suddenly everyone in Cheers is homophobic, and it's like a morality piece, and it doesn't connect at all with anything else that came before or after Cheers. To me, my hero is the boys in the bar of season 1 of Scrubs. And that is just kind of crazy to me that I said those words.
What happens in this episode that you think is like out of character for these characters?
Okay, and it's not out of character for these characters. It's out of sorts for what the show becomes. So then this stands as a weird sort of totem or talisman or marker of this. Okay, so then it connects to his story, right? The only episodes between season 1 and season 5 that I had seen prior to watching my screw up last year for Will's birthday was his story 2, and her story. And the reason I did that is because his story 3 in season 5, that is from the janitor's perspective, was fantastic. But a thing that Scrubs did, prior to this episode and post this episode, it is JD's perspective on everything that is going on. Like, that's sort of what we're getting. And of course, it plays with that a little bit. But hearing what Turk and Todd are thinking about, like, really hit me weird. The first time I saw it back in 2002, and again watching it to remind myself about these episodes. And then we touched on it last episode, but the fact that JD is writing in that journal, and then we never see that journal again. Like, everything you guys are saying about they're a show, they're trying to find their footing, they're trying to find their way. This episode feels like a relic of when that's exactly what they were doing. Like, I would imagine this is one of the earlier episodes that they wrote. But then as the show grew and changed, it's the How I Met Your Mother problem, is what I'm touching on. That show grew out of Ted telling his kids the story of how he met their mother so he could say, is it cool if I bang your Aunt Robin? But that's still the ending that they wrote from the beginning.
I think more to the point what you're saying is that there are then moments woven throughout that show that you then scratch your head that you're like, what does Ted have to do with this? Like, as the narrator of this piece, like the structure is kind of broken by what they're doing in the for the sake of comedy, for the sake of sitcom storytelling.
Yeah, and it's just
I would say it even feels like this episode was written before Scrubs was like, it feels like this was something that a writer had in their desk from like a whole other project. Like, what did we do recently where we talked about the idea? Oh, American Pie, right? Our episode on American Pie, American Wedding, about that idea being that it was written in a way that if everybody said no, then they could just change the names and just make a different movie. But like, for real though, like that movie, when you watch it, you're just like, oh yeah, this is just so weird. These characters have not really ever said this or behaved in this way or done any of this. It feels almost like that's what this episode of Scrubs is. This was like somebody's like spec script for an ER episode that never got made.
Right. Or this was, I don't know the history of Scrubs. Either one of you is going to be able to fill that in better for me. How many episodes do they initially have ordered is going to be my question. Do we know? They got the full season from the start?
They got the season from the start.
Okay.
This was not at the time of fuckery in which people got like 13 episode runs and we'll see how you do after Christmas. Like, no, they got picked up, so they got picked up for a season. Now, they could have gotten canceled at any point. People would get pulled off the air all the time. But in terms of like what they were good for, they were given the gold. I think 21 episodes, and then I think there's with the option for 3 if things were going well. I don't know what happens with this particular season. But I
do know that extra episodes were added to the end of this, because I remember that being a big deal, that Scrubs is doing so well that we're adding episodes. That was like so crazy in 2002. Oh, God, I also can't believe these episodes are 20 years old. These first
I think
ones.
Part of the reason why I feel kind of in that same vein, Dev, like, but I do think that there is a lot more solid grounding for Scrubs. Just I want to remind everybody how much Devin is invested in this show versus the other people on this podcast at this moment. But like ways in which this episode really is very Scrubsy, and specifically season 1 Scrubs is the whole like breaking and rebuilding of the pedestal that we put Dr. Cox on, is like such season 1 Scrubs like material. Like it is just the bread and butter of that season, is like the reminder that while Cox is not perfect, he is in fact the best doctor in this hospital. I mean, the entire pilot, right, is about exactly that, where JD hates him at first but then realizes what a good doctor and what a good person he is. And you know, that is this entire episode for his part of it, at least. I'll give you some of the weirder stuff that happens with like Jordan, and the more playful nature of her seems a little weird for that character, both before and after. But also her brother is here and has leukemia, so like I'm super willing to forgive that in a character. And then, you know, the other story that's going on in this one is fucking what's his nuts tricks Carla and Sarah Chalk into what are the character names? I'm losing
Elliot Reed.
Elliot,
Carla
Espinosa. Dr. Kelso tricks Elliot and Carla into doing the whole
her evaluation.
And he does it on purpose, right? Like, he clearly does it on purpose. He makes it seem to her that they're going to be anonymous, so to not hold anything back. But then, like, also, I only did one at a time, so fuck you, I know exactly who wrote this. Like, there's like, that whole storyline is, I don't know, that feels like fucking bang on for a subplot in some later season, like season 3 or 4. Like, what a fuck he is, but also the resolution of Elliot being able to finally say to him. And, you know, Dr. Kelso was such an interesting character to me, because I really did, like, buy in day one when they really try and sell him as the villain of this piece, right? This antagonistic character that is always going to be present. And like I bought into that. And then by the end of the series, still loving that character, right? And like that's nothing new. Like being able to find antagonistic characters that are always kind of still like enjoyable because they're there. It's just that there's something about the way that Scrubs in general always kind of wants to eventually find their way to just like forgiving every character, right? I mean, you talked about it just moments ago, Dev, with like getting the my episode. What's the name of the ones where it's from the different people's perspective?
Either his or her or their story,
right? And you get like entire episodes from like the janitor's perspective. It's because Scrubs wants you to love these people, no matter how antagonistic they may seem towards JD. Like they still, at the end of the day, want you to understand that everybody here is doing their best, right? And that's kind of the heart and soul of the show in some ways. So like this episode, I think, celebrates all of that. I just think that comparing it to the episode before, and then as I've already said, what we get then in season 3 when we come back to the story is almost unfair.
I mean, even the follow-up episode to this episode in season, My Last Day, like that is... There's a reason why I was so excited for the return of season 2 of Scrubs. Because I will remind people, while I am the person who has the least amount of love in my heart for Scrubs of the 3 assembled, I, at one time, had nothing but feelings of enjoyment and love and caring about the show in that first season. But even then, like, the reason why I asked how many episodes they had is it kind of felt like if they had 6 episodes, this episode may have been the finale of that first season. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, like, I mean, it's like, to take it back into people saying you don't know how long you're going to get. When 24 was first put out on the air, after 12 episodes, everything kind of wraps up. And then in episode 13, it all goes wrong again. Because they didn't know if they were going to get that second half of the season.
Right, right.
And it kind of hits this like, oh, maybe we do kick off, and then we have a big first guest star come on in. And this is kind of before they'd started exploring any of the background characters you learn about as you go through. Like Doug doesn't get anything, Laverne barely gets mentioned. Even Kelso and Ted are still kind of caricatures of their actual characters that we get in the rest of this.
In terms of like fantasy sequences for JD, I think we get one of the weirdest ones here where we see the whole
the real world
like spoof. Like it's not that they don't do spoofy stuff. It's just that like it's such a low pull, and like they don't do anything with the joke. Like Brendan Fraser just stands there with a dog for 5 minutes. Like that's the whole joke. The best part of that joke is that he has a dog in his hand the whole time that just kind of goes unmentioned. Other than that, like there's no punchline to that joke, right? Which is weird for them because they are better at that, right?
I also feel like that joke, like Jordan literally just called Dr. Cox Perry, and then he's Dr. Cox in the Real World opening. And, like, they could have written Perry and then had it crossed out and then Dr. Cox. They could have done better real-world jokes.
Yeah,
the way that they
exactly.
Like,
they could have done jokes. Is my point.
Like, or I'm just talking references. Like that's the stuff that the real world would do. Like, it's not completely off the mark. So the fact that he's just Dr. Cox, it's like, oh, I mean, I guess, right? Like,
I mean, they don't want to take away from the piss joke, Devin.
Is he pissing?
Yeah, you can't avoid that.
He's definitely pissing in that.
I think that's what he's supposed to be doing.
All right.
I'm time out, Zach Morris style here. All of us have rocked a piss outside, right? None of us is hoity-toity, pinky raised to not admit that they've taken a piss outside, right? Am I wrong?
Devin, I did it 5 minutes before we recorded. I practically texted you about it.
Okay. Will?
It's all I do. So the only place. Oh, so I fucked a spider? What else am I going to do?
All right. Would you ever stand on a bench to rock that piss? Like, it's so incongruous with it.
Only if I was a bad boy like Dr. Cox.
Yeah.
Because he's the bad boy.
In my younger days, I definitely would have been like I feel like you see this in like Judd Apatow movies when like kids get quote unquote wild, right? Is like climbing on shit and breaking things, right? And there's definitely that part of it. But I do think there is something about, isn't there something specific about what he's pissing on? Isn't he pissing on the sign?
He's standing on a bench. And that's what my mind remembers. I would understand pissing on the bench, like if it were, you know, some memorial bench, or it had Jordan's name on it because her family is the one who, you know, donated the money that put that bench there. It is the very weird fact that he is standing on the bench pissing. That's like...
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe the other thing is it also could be a direct reference. The other problem with doing a real world joke is that they're making fun of a thing that nowadays doesn't exist. And again, that's something that happens.
Even in 99, it really didn't exist anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and then it's 2002, right? So fuck me for saying 99. I'm still in the world of gods and monsters. That's my bad.
No, but I mean, more to your point in that regard, right?
Yeah. It really just feels like you said, it was an earlier written episode of Scrubs. I think they were able to get some Scrubs stuff into there, like with the worthless peons being Ted's band in here, not named yet, but, you know, being there and actually being introduced in this episode. Like, that feels like something that we're able to do because of everything that we've done leading up to this episode. But honestly, that thing with Elliot, Carla, and Dr. Kelso, that feels like that would have been the other side of it. As much as it's the breaking down of Cox as this heroic figure, like literal hero worship on display, a moment where Kelso is being built up to realize that, like, his old teaching methods are no longer working.
You're literally describing a subplot for the next episode, right? Like,
yeah.
Like I'm not like calling you out. I'm pointing out that, like, yeah, like you were totally right. And they learn that by later episodes, right? Like the ways in which they work with that character to make him not more likable, but rather give him like those soft moments that everybody else gets, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean,
they bring in, like, when Dick Van Dyke comes in as a guest further down the line, and they have the whole conversation about how Kelso is fighting real hard to stay relevant in the medical world. Mm-hmm. At his age, and having to go to these conferences and stay in terrible hotels because otherwise he's going to fall behind, and then he's going to be no use to teaching or to anyone in the hospital. He has to be on top of things and up to date, and not just do his old methods and think everything he did was correct.
And he does. I mean, like, and this is stuff that's all revealed later in the series, but like, he likes being a doctor, right? Like, there's this, like, It's the Brooklyn Nine-Nine beat that we all know and love. Is like the biggest joke of all in this show is that they're all very good at their jobs, right? Like, like they're just good doctors. Yeah.
And they have, and I think, as we said, it is credited as being one of the most medically accurate shows, and I think they went to places because it was a comedy, and they could to places where other potential shows wouldn't go. I mean, there's one earlier on in the series where JD gets hit by a needle that might have come from a patient.
Right.
And it's like, that's, if that was a, I don't know, ER or Grey's Anatomy story, you're going to spend 20 minutes crying at these people who are stressed and panicking, whereas in this, they managed to approach it in a way where this is a legitimate thing that happens to doctors probably far too often, but it doesn't have to be a sit and stare and quiet.
Yeah,
we do
literally
this.
Procedure for, yeah. And even though, and it's also scary. Like I remember watching that episode and being like, I mean, like the things that could happen, but you can't dwell on that. You still have to be a doctor.
Right.
You can't be afraid of your patients, which is another JD moment where he's like, you know, I'm a doctor who's afraid of my patient.
Yeah.
He's like, it probably does. It's a crisis of faith. It probably happens to most doctors when they get to a point where, I mean, season 2 is the showing of that, where they get to that, hey, we're the big guys now. We run this place. Oh shit, we're on our own for the first time ever.
Yeah, exactly. But like the needle story, like it's, you know, it is a thinly veiled comment on the AIDS crisis and the ways in which there was a moment where medical doctors had to kind of come to terms with this thing of like their personal beliefs versus what they had to be doing as doctors, right? And there were straight up doctors that did not want to be around their patients in that regard, right? Like it's a, I mean, I don't want to believe that you could apply it to everything that happened not 5 years ago, but we did hear all this shit about like people in the medical profession that just straight up were just like arguing with the government about what they thought should and shouldn't be done. I don't want to give them any more airtime, but like we did see that it's still a thing that happens, right?
Oh yeah. And I think that's why, like, I mean, I remember my parents talking about ER when I was growing up, and it was always a show that my mum watched, and I would watch with her sometimes. It was one of the first kind of medical shows that focused on the doctors rather than the medicine.
And it was it wasn't about like the patients and about like the mystery of disease. It was rather like who's fucking who behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was very much. I mean, you saw them outside of the hospital and having lives and doing stuff. And it dived into stuff that probably wasn't mentioned in medical dramas before, because before it was always about, oh my god, this happened to this person, we need to all deal with this for the episode, and then we move on to a new storyline, and you don't really get that development. Well, and I think Scrubs done as well, and it's kind of become much more of the way that these TV series are made. The hospital becomes just a part of the story rather than the actual forefront of the story.
You know what's got a really weird balance of this exact kind of thing? Actually, I was honestly just having this thought last night as I was watching. I've decided to become a West Wing guy.
Great choice.
Congratulations.
It's an amazing place to be.
I've always loved Sorkin, and there's like a solid mid couple of seasons of that show that I watched because my parents were watching, so like I do have some memories, but like it wasn't the early stuff, and it sure as hell wasn't towards the end. So like I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the whole thing, but I'm now watching early season of West Wing, and it is this really weird balance because the whole point of that show is supposed to be about let's show these White House staffers, but let's show like what's going on in their lives, clearly overly dramatized in so many different ways. I mean, literally one of the first arcs in that show is Rob Lowe having sex with a call girl by accident because he's just so goddamn good looking. But we're not going to get into that right now. This is not.
But he doesn't pay for it, right? Did you pay for it?
No, it's on HBO.
That's
no.
line
Did Rob
you're making a reference to the fucking we're not doing that right now, Dev. I just said that. But
we should.
One of the biggest things that I noticed is everybody has that kind of storyline, except Bartlett, President Bartlett. They keep mentioning family members and all of these activities that he's doing, and like. Purposefully so in some places. I mean, literally the pilot, the whole point is he does not show up until like the last 5 minutes. Spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen it, but it's still a phenomenal reveal when he does. I promise you. But we never get to see any of his personal life. And it's such a weird juxtaposition to everybody else on that show that at this point it has to be purposeful. I'm 5 episodes in, and I'm just like, there's no way that they're not doing this on purpose now, right?
Potential spoilers.
It's a weird feeling.
Potential spoilers for you, Zejan. Initially, Bartlett was going to have, like, no presence at all, except for those first 5 minutes in the pilot. And when they got Martin Sheen, that's when they're like, maybe we should take advantage of the fact that Martin Sheen wants to play ball with us.
But all credit to Sorkin and anyone else involved in getting that off the ground, because you wouldn't fucking be able to tell. Like, the ways in which they focus on Bartlett, it's not noticeable in that regard.
While you go on, it becomes a little bit more apparent, but it is one of those situations where, no, we're focusing on the staffers. We don't care about the president. But then, because of the American president, Sorkin is able to get in touch with Sheen to be like, hey, you want to play this role? And then Sheen's expecting to play the role, like, as a recurring character, not just as a one-time guest spot. And that gobsmacks everybody in the room. I don't know why that's my adjective this month, but it is.
I love that President Bartlett is the Kramer of the West Wing.
You clap whenever he's on screen.
That explains also why Dulé Hill doesn't come in until 3 episodes in, because fuck me, I love Dulé Hill on that show. That is one of the big things that I do remember is some of the later episodes. I remember very specifically the knife. For anybody that knows the show, knows what I'm talking about. Man, fuck yeah. So, but to your conversation about this idea of just like the ways in which ER is kind of like exploring this thing, and the balance starts to feel off kilter. It becomes such a thing in that era of television to really kind of explore that kind of honestly, it's like the celebrities, they're just like us feel of reality TV. It kind of explains why we kind of fell into that reality television hole of the 2000s. But then Scrubs takes that entire idea and turns the absurdity on it up to 1,000, right? Like this idea that at the end of the day, these are human beings that have decided to dedicate their lives to just picking apart other humans.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it does actually go into it. I mean, to jump around the series for moments that are kind of coming to mind as we talk, there is the bit where all about Kelso being heartless and able to just switch off and wander away from his patients. He never And literally, he always walks out of the hospital whistling.
Yeah.
And he goes and he talks about, the moment my foot hits the bottom of those steps, I have to switch off.
Yeah.
And I can't go home thinking about my day. And at the end of that episode, he does take an extra beat and a breath and then walks off whistling. Be like, it's you have to find a way to ignore it and go home, which you can't do.
It's one of the most interesting conversations in like medical sciences for me is the idea of bedside manner, right? Like, and like we have I feel as somebody that has that is not in the medical profession, but as somebody that has to interact with a lot of medical professionals more often than he would like to in his old age. But that idea being that I want them to be better at talking to people. I have met some very good doctors in that regard, and I have met a lot more bad ones in that regard. But at the same time, I have medical professionals in my family. Like my mother has spent her entire life working with older patients, and that requires a certain level of disconnect because she'd walk in some days and patients that she had just been seeing yesterday she no longer was going to see again, right? And she has to keep working, right? Like that idea being that, like, I understand the need for that kind of compartmentalization, and exploring that in the arts is awesome, right? Like I think that's so I applaud shows like ER for doing this kind of stuff. And I love when Scrubs is willing to go really deep into to why sometimes the science still doesn't make you feel any fucking better when it comes to it at the end of the day, right? Like I love those kinds of stories. And this episode is just it's not my favorite episode of Scrubs, but at the end of the day, it's a fucking episode of Scrubs, man. Like I know that you say, Dev, that you feel like, man, it even feels like it's something completely different. And I did point out that there are a couple of things that I agree with you on that. At the end of the day, the moments where it is Scrubs are just too good for me. Like, I do love this episode.
Is the Steely Dan effect. Do It Again is their worst song, but it's still better than, like, any other song you're going to hear.
Yep.
Well, I was going to say the same, but with pizza, bad pizza is still pizza.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's good. It's still good. It's still better than not pizza.
All right.
Salami whiskey is still whiskey, gents.
I don't know. that might be the bridge where.
Everybody, is this where I lose everybody?
I think I'd fuck a snake before I'd have salami whiskey. What is this? Do we want to celebrate any of the Brendan moments in this before we go to the quiz part of it? I mean, we've gone a little long here, but.
Yeah, I will point out that all of the love that I gave to John C. McGinley in this episode, it is because it is him playing with Brendan so much in this episode. And again, this is something we'll see more in the next episode. But like those moments when he's in the room with Brendan, and then like the weird moments for him are when he's not. Like I will always and forever, and this is entirely costuming's fault, I hate first season Dr. Cox at home. We see it a lot in the first season. I think one of the first episodes is like JD comes over for like a baseball game or something. But like Dr. Cox at home, he's wearing these like half-buttoned silk button-down shirts, right? And he's like sitting in like a giant armchair looking at just to keep talking about How I Met Your Mother. Like it's almost like every time we go into Barney's apartment where they don't even show the TV, you just get the impression that it's like the size of the wall.
It's 300 feet. It's a 300 feet
right.
screen.
Yeah. Like that kind of shit happening. Like those moments are always just so weird to me. Like it feels like I'm watching like Logan's Run, the television show or some shit. Like it feels out of space and time. But then when he's in the hospital and he's in those moments where he's like in the room with Brendan Fraser, like that is amazing. This is the one where we get the moment at the TV, right? Where they're sitting in the waiting room and Brendan Fraser has finally put on a robe, right?
Yeah, a gown. Yeah, when they're watching Wings.
It's a beautiful moment. Yeah. It's a beautiful moment from Fraser because it's him reaching out to Cox, right? Like he's reaching out to him, trying to show that he like really is going through some shit, and by all accounts, from what we understand about this character, Cox is his best friend, right? And so, like, when he's trying to talk to him about the fact that he's going through some shit, and Cox is just, like, straight up just like, no, we are not going to talk about this, and the hurt that you, like, see on his face in that moment, but he still keeps it together, right? Mm-hmm. He plays it so good, because it's not that it's subtle, because I don't think Scrubs is subtle, but, like, his ability to play to JD while Cox is just ignoring him, and it's a great moment for him.
Yeah. For me,
I think what you're saying about Cox's apartment, and this is something that Bill Lawrence admitted on the podcast, was they ran out of ideas for rooms, So they bought, obviously the hospital was where everything's filmed, so the bottom floor is still a hospital, the middle floor was their production offices, and then the floor above was everyone's apartments in different sets. If you look at whenever Dr. Cox is in his apartment, it's just a hospital room with a couch put in the middle of it and a couple of flowers. Right. It's like we didn't set dress at all properly. We didn't clear the room. We just like, oh God, we need to do a Dr. Cox at home scene, which is why it looks so sterile and terrible. And they're like, it kind of works for the character, but also, yeah, it's so awkward, Cox at home, because it is just one of the patient rooms.
Yeah. Well, but I think about later episodes when, like, the episode where JD babysits Cox's kid and in true saccharine MD nature discovers that the kid might have autism, right? Because of, like, the way that he's piling blocks or some whatever ER nonsense. Like I think about that episode, and I don't hate it, right? And I'm sure it's because by that point they had kind of gotten a little bit more together about what establishes Cox's apartment, especially now that Jordan is more involved with him and stuff like that, right? Like,
yeah.
Like there is eventually a point where I'm okay with it, but like those early episodes in season 1 and 2 where they go to Cox's house, I always feel uncomfortable. And I have to say, part of that is to their credit, right? Because if this is the show from JD's perspective, like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Though I'll say that scene is probably my favorite scene that doesn't feature Brendan Fraser in this episode. When he's like, I think I figured it out, you're scared. And his response of like, oh, you figured that out on your own? Is it because I told you? Is it because I told you I'm scared? Huh? That how you're able to solve that mystery?
Still some of the best acting from John C. McGinley.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. It's just, like, that is a moment that I really like. And I think the bare bones nature of his house really kind of does allow his performance to sing in that moment. And I will also say Jordan and Ben's relationship, because up to this point, she has just been a man-destroying succubus banshee combo in this show. To humanize her against her relationship with Ben is
I will point out that she likes being that person. It's not that she's that person and it like causes her problems in life. She has been very successful being a banshee.
Yes. No. Yeah.
And they call on her. They call on her to be that guy.
Yes,
and exactly. Like we need a strong female character to go and break this person down. Here's Jordan.
Yeah,
but then to Devin's point, right? Like the way this episode humanizes her is back to what I was saying earlier: is that this show always finds that way to take these antagonistic characters and explore this other aspect of them that we don't always get to see. But when we do get to see it, like it feels good, right? Yeah. Like that's where Scrub really excels as far as the character work goes. Is when people play against character. Often it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel wrong. It actually feels like cathartic. Yeah.
It is. The Tonka truck scene is beautiful. That's the one. That's the other moment in this that is just tattooed on my mind. That and did you ever notice you guys are both bald? That's weird, right?
Oh God.
Casual racism through the lens of the Say Report. All right. Anything from you, Will, before we start the quiz of this? We talked a lot about the episode that like all of us were like, it's kind of weak. But I think
it's a good one. I mean, you may have got some answers dropped in to the conversation. So let's see how we go. Let's see if you can remember what you talked about.
I'm excited.
Are these open notebook quizzes? I just have to ask.
By that, you mean can you have the IMDb trivia page up on your laptop while you talk? Or...
No, I said open notebook, like the notebook I took my notes in.
I mean, I'm not gonna say you can't, but I think CJ might get upset.
Oh, that seems fair.
Well, he's winning.
I'd be upset that you would like. Believe me. I don't take notes. I know Devin takes like copious notes, and so I have no fear. Let's do this.
Well, the problem is that I'm also playing the quiz in the same notebook. It's very difficult.
Well, then, open book exam allowed. Seaton, you can have your mind open. It seems to be the notebook. So you're good to go. All right, let's roll straight in. So, question 1 about the episode My Hero. JD and Ben perform a physical stunt that becomes an ongoing joke. What is that?
Yay!
Okay.
Question 2. What procedure does Turk want to perform, but it's given to Bonnie instead?
Oh man.
Which was the storyline we
Wait,
didn't really talk about.
Can you ask that again? Sorry, ask that again.
What surgical procedure does Turk want to perform, but it is given to Bonnie instead?
Okay. Man, last time I had just watched the episodes. This time, I'm okay.
Oh, I rewatched the episodes today. I
Oh, that will help. Question 3. We meet Ted's band for the first time. What is the first cartoon theme song they perform? And there are 2 bonus points available.
3
with this one.
Oh shit.
Oh.
Ooh.
What is their show name and their real name as a band? Things we talked about in the build-up to this quiz.
But I don't remember that one. The one that was given to me.
All right, question number 4, if we all have answers for things. Question 4. What does Ben's mum, and now Jordan, always buy him when he gets sick?
No bonus points on that one?
No, because you literally, 2 minutes ago?
I literally just said it, right? Were there
like
originally bonus points?
I mean, you can put down which specific one it was, if that makes you feel better. But
that'll just be to flex
That's
in
just
this
for you.
audio program.
Yeah. Just to make everyone else feel bad.
Whatever, you see with your eyes.
Final question of the My Hero trivia. What period of history does Elliot suggest Dr. Kelso hasn't gotten any since? Or what moment in history does Elliot reference?
Yeah, buddy.
Devin sounds confident. Siege, and you've gone quiet. We okay?
Oh,
You still
I'm
there?
sorry. No, I'm putting my answers down. I forgot that I did have a suggestion or a thought, or rather, it was a complaint, but I'm trying not to frame it as such. That it seemed like last time I went first on all of the questions.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm just pointing out that it was pointed out to me after after I kind of talked to everybody in the house who can hear everything I do when I record.
Fine. You were just so excited. I don't even know. I'll go first this time. I don't care.
There we go. And you can just agree, Siege, it's fine.
Yeah, right? You're already winning.
All right. Well, then, if we have answers, and Devin, you can answer the first one.
Eagle!
Yes.
The eagle spin.
Exactly. The eagle is introduced.
We see that in one of the other great episode moments for Jordan. I forgot about that. Is with the kids when she first walks in, and I love that moment when he picks her up too. Now Eagle is an ongoing joke for JD, but it's not an ongoing joke like with Brendan Fraser, right?
No, it's not. It's become JD and Turk.
The way that you asked that question, I kept trying to think of what do him and Brendan Fraser do that him and Brendan Fraser then end up doing for all the time, and I was like, I don't know, but I did remember Eagle, so I did write down Eagle.
Yeah, it's the first time that he ever says eagle like that,
Eagle.
And it was Zach Braff completely ad-libbing in the moment.
Yes, it was. Yeah, points all around for Eagle. Oh, I should have the point. I should have these points in. Forget where you are.
It's 1 point.
All right, question 2. What procedure does Turk want to perform, but it is given to Bonnie instead?
A Whipple, which is a pancreatic surgical procedure.
A Whipple.
Whipple.
Cripple. Yes, it's pronounced cripple. Todd says the full name, but Whipple is the word that they keep throwing around, which sounds funnier than pancreatic tumor.
What's a man got to do to get a Whipple around here? That's the line.
Whipple.
That he says.
That is nice. All right, question 3. 3 points available. We meet Ted's band for the first time. What is the first cartoon theme song they perform?
Here here comes Speed Racer. He's a demon on wheels. He's a demon and he's gonna be chasing after someone.
Yes, indeed, he's Speed Racer. And then the bonus points available for the two names that the bands go by, once in the real world and in the show.
So in the real world, they're the blanks.
And in the show, they're the worthless peons.
It's because you are a worthless peon and you will always be a worthless peon.
So I think we each got 2 points there.
Correct.
I'm sorry, what?
Did you get 3 there, or did you get 2?
They're the worthless peons.
Okay, well I didn't get the blanks.
I thought you got 3.
I didn't get the. I didn't know the remember the blanks. You said it earlier, and then I'm like, fuck, I forgot the
real
name of the
world.
band.
My favorite one that the blanks do, and I think they do eventually do it in an episode though, is Charles in Church. That's
Yes, they do it in an episode.
They do.
I
That's
think
on the
his
one when
story
they,
3.
Yeah, when Carla switches shifts.
Yeah.
They stand around the fire outside the trash can fire.
Yeah.
I will say that I did not get an answer before. I don't know how I missed it, but
Oh, okay. Well,
okay, well this is the one that Devin talked about just before we started.
like literally right before the quiz. You know, when I was a kid,
I missed the question because I was trying to remember worthless peons.
Okay, well I'm going to ask the question and you can answer first if you know.
Okay.
What does Ben's mom and now Jordan buy him because he always gets one when he is sick?
Tonka trucks.
Yes, the Tonka trucks.
Okay, I did get that right.
specifically this time, it's the Earth Mover.
It is specifically the Earth move.
Boobs.
Boop,
Boop boop.
yeah.
And she looks so
Yes,
annoyed, but
that-
also so full of love for her brother.
It's because she's a softer kisser.
No, Danny's the softer kisser.
So Danny's a softer kisser.
Oh my god.
It's like
That's
Fang.
the next episode. We could talk about
Yes.
the weird incest jokes next episode.
We're gonna have
And-
to. I know.
We're going to have to get into it. It's not. You can't just let that pass you by. And question 5, our final one for my hero. What moment in history does Elliot reference since Dr. Kelso has gotten any?
Well, Elliot doesn't reference anything. Carla references it in Elliot's reaction, thing about him. Either way, it's the Bay of Pigs. But Carla fills out Elliot's form. So Elliot's not quick-witted enough to come up with that. It's Carla who says it.
I wrote Paleolithic because that's the funniest era.
Yeah, that's when Brendan Fraser is Link from Encino Man. But it's the Bay of Pigs invasion.
It is the Bay of Pigs invasion. Whether it's whoever references it, it is referenced in the evaluation of Elliot.
Elliot's evaluation that is written by Carla Espinosa.
So I got one wrong.
You got one wrong. Devin got one wrong.
I didn't get one wrong. I didn't get a bonus point.
You didn't get a bonus point. So you
I got everything
you
right.
caught up, but not fully.
Nope. No, I haven't caught up. CJ
Yeah,
should
not
still be
fully.
1
You're
point
catching
ahead of
up.
me. Because life is like a box of chocolates, and you never quite know what you're going to get. Should be 12.5 to 13.5, right? Is that mathematically correct?
Hang on, I'm trying to count.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 6 points this time, and I had
You had
How many
8.5.
points
So
8.5.
Yeah,
So
so
that would make me
that's
14 and a
14.
half is what that would put me at.
So nothing, nothing has
And
changed.
13 and a half. Yeah, we are still
No,
where we were.
I mean
Everything is
6 plus 6.5 is 12.5. So, yay! No money is exchanged, and I think that's the end of the episode, boys.
Devin's getting so sad as we go along. Don't do that.
I can't remember. I couldn't remember the blanks. I'm like, he said it earlier. It was handed to me. Underdog. I got to say it. Also, I have to do one more thing before we actually send this one out. There goes my hero. Watch him as he goes. Sorry, I had to do it.
Couldn't include it. It was it's 5 years too early, I think, for that song.
No,
Yeah,
how was that?
They weren't quite right. They couldn't even have had My Hero by Enrique Iglesias.
That's not the song I
Just
said.
Hero, so just Hero.
Hero by the friggin' Nickelback, it's like, no, that's already happened. I don't even know what's happening. My Hero is Foo Fighters. That existed. Isn't that off of Sound in the Shape?
What's the year on My Hero? I could have thought that.
I thought it was a 1993 song. Let's look it up before we say goodbye. Will, why don't you...
The Foo Fighters didn't exist in 1993. Dave Grohl was a little busy at that time.
Oh,
with a different
95. That's...
Well, this episode came out in 2002. We can definitely confirm that.
Yeah,
But when
1997. It is off of The Color and the Shape. So, 97. So, it could have happened.
You know what's weird is the song itself has a 1998 release. Oh, I guess if it as a single, I guess.
Yeah, the album came out in 97, and then it was
yeah,
like the third single off of that album. That album's incredible. Color and the Shape's such a good album. All right, so thank you for joining us for this weird double feature with honors My Hero episode of the Stay Report with a little bit of Brendan Fraser quiz of Brendan Fraser. To do it. If you have any comments or you want to yell at us about anything that we got wrong about With Honor, Scrubs, The West Wing, just like life in general, you can find us online at The Stay Report. That's also the best way to get in touch with Sejan since he's no longer on Twitter.
And if you want to hit Dev up and send me just some pictures of Tonka trucks to make him feel better, you can find him at Devin D. Tecker.
It's not even a Tonka truck. It's a knockoff. And Will, if you want to do your bit and then throw to yourself, that'd be lovely.
Well, yeah, I should just apologize to all Enrique Iglesias fans out there. Hero actually came out in 2001, so it could have been included in this episode.
Every Hero song could have been in this episode, even the Nickelback Spider-Man one. Think about it.
Even that, and I Need a Hero.
Yes, that song from 1984 could have been.
Definitely could have been included. Re-released by the Worthless Peons.
Do you want to throw it to yourself, Will?
Yeah, sure. I guess no one seemed up for my idea of the Worthless Peons covering I Need a Hero, so thank you for listening. More apologies to everybody, and apologies to your mother. Over to me.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devin Decker and Seaton Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.